Week 2 block party and Bully the Sim show. For the first week, we had to do this pre-recorded early, all of that stuff, knocking the rust off. But we are back in the saddle here, live with JMToWin for the block party, immediately followed by the Bully the Sim show with Youdacao and Bric75. It's 2 hours straight of hardcore DFS talk. We're going to get you guys ready for the week 2 slate, top plays, GPP pivots, building a lineup with all of JM's favorite building blocks. I'm Pete Overzet. This is the block party. Let's do it.
Peter's one of the greatest depositors I've ever seen.
Trust the process. Let's go.
I got auto match with Levitan. Bullshit.
I just go the other way. In that 66, I win all the money. All the money.
If I had 150 lineups, I'd win too.
AP, crash 5 bullets in your head like KD. Bust it, bitch, go bust it. And I had 10 pints with me in Russia.
Hey, everyone.
All right. Hey, everyone. Indeed, we are live on the Overzet YouTube channel. JMToWin from 1 week season. Looking good in your orange autumn sweatshirt.
It's red, but it is autumn. I've got my
I've
got my leggings on. I've got my tee today. It's kind of an overcast day, sub 70 degrees here in the Pacific Northwest. So it felt right. It felt like it's fall right now.
That's right. If you guys are new to this show, we are going to walk through the whole slate. We do a little rewind to week 1. We do kind of a macro slate overview. Then we go position by position and wrap up building a lineup on DraftKings with JM's favorite building blocks. So how did your week 1 go? I know you were all over the Emeka Egbuka. Did you get any teams up there above the cash line?
Yeah, it was one of those weeks where it was like, I think it was like 6% of my rosters were top 2% of tournaments. Like 2% of my rosters were top 1%. So none of those top 0.1% finishes, but I had a lot of shots, had a profitable weekend. And honestly, like in DFS, we always say the goal isn't a profitable weekend because we're chasing asymmetric payouts. What matters over time is those first place finishes. But psychologically, it still is nice to get a profitable weekend. I was actually on my 6K in entry fees. I was negative $9 before that Broncos strip sack fumble to end that game. So nice little swing there where just psychologically went from very slightly down to up a little bit. So yeah, good weekend. Not as eventful as your weekend with balling with some NFL players, but yeah, it was a good weekend for DFS for me.
Yes, my weekend was, I only ended up playing one lineup. I was like, you know what? I'm going low volume this week. Got a lot going on. I'm excited to kind of ramp it up. This week I had rolled out a Bo Nix double stack, and that did not go well for me.
I was funny. Well, you saw this. I saw you like this on X, but I went ahead and watched all 16 games on Monday and Tuesday from this last weekend.
Yeah.
Man, watching Bo Nix was like watching Baker Mayfield, but without like the ability to hit his targets. But it'll come back to him. Like, it wasn't a bad stack. He did not have it this last week. It was like his confidence was sky high and his actual play was like below his average level. So it was not a good combination there.
I actually think that's kind of a good place to start as far as like a macro thing. Obviously, week 1 kind of wide open. We're really learning what these teams are going to look like, how they're going to deploy their players. We now have a single data point. That is still a very insignificant data point in the, grand scheme of things. And yet it's all we have right now, and trying to figure out what was signal from week 1, what's going to continue, what was noise, what was fluky. We're all trying to figure out, is Harold Fannin Isaiah likely from last year, or is Harold Fannin going to be a top 6 option the rest of the way? I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on specific situations that you find noisy or you find signal with?
Well, yeah, the biggest thing about week 1 is not overrating it. And that's the same thing, whether you're watching all the games or looking at all the stats and spreadsheets. And obviously I was able to do both this week, right? Like, I still did my normal research of advanced stats and spreadsheets and then was able to compare that against everything I watched. But it's still like, okay, we can overrate this 1 week. So I think that's the biggest thing is seeing what's real, seeing what's not. I like the Isaiah Likely comp because my initial instinct on Harold Fannin, which people tuned in, it's the start of the show. Let's talk Harold Fannin, right? Like, literally people are interested because he's 3,100 this week. He played from the slide. Okay. For you younger cats out there, this is just like historical stuff in the NFL. But for anybody my age or a little bit younger, you watched Gronk and Aaron Hernandez, right? This wasn't Gronk and Aaron Hernandez, but that was what it kept reminding me of, was these were 2 completely different positions, right? So David Njoku had one position. Harold Fannin had a totally different position. It was H-back. It was slot wide receiver. It was lined up in the backfield. He took a wildcat snap. There were screens designed for him. He was Flacco's favorite target on scramble plays. But then you bring up Isaiah Likely, and it was like, we've had this offseason where Harbaugh has been saying, I think Isaiah Likely is going to be an all-pro this year. That means the number one tight end in the entire NFL. And last year they used him like they thought that was what he was going to be. That year in week one, it was schemed targets. It was everything designed to go to him. And then that just went away. So there is the possibility that that just goes away. I would say that over a large enough sample size of situations like this, where the usage is that concerted in week one, we continue to see it. But we have had like the Tariq Cohen week in his first or second year, where he had the monster game, tons of schemed usage. They'd hidden him all preseason. And then Isaiah Likely last year. So yeah, I don't want to overrate 1 week. We can look at the usage and say it was very real. It was very schemed. It was definitely part of the offense. These were not 9 accidental targets. It was maybe 2 or 3 accidental targets. And maybe his typical range is going to be that 5, 6, 7 target range. But yeah, I would expect it to continue going forward, just because, that's what they have to work with there. Thrash hardly played. It was just a lot of, 2 wide, quote, 2 wide receiver sets with Fana and Njoku on the field.
What do you think about some of the, the teams that didn't perform well, most notably the Dolphins, right? And we had talked a little bit about them on the show, kind of a wide range of outcomes. We saw one tail of those outcomes against the Colts. Is that a spot where you think they could bounce back, or is that now you've seen the data point you need and you're off that?
Well, we've got a confluence of interesting factors here, because the vibes were we said it last week on the show, like that's all you heard out of Miami was the vibes are off. And that was what it looked like. It looked like a team that didn't show up to play. They had no intensity. But then we come back to Miami, where the Patriots have been practicing in Massachusetts weather, and they're going to go down to the Miami Heat, be wearing their dark blue jerseys, be standing on the sideline with the sun. For most of you know this, but the Dolphins literally have that stadium set up so that the sun beats down on the opposing team's sideline in these afternoon games. The Patriots are 1-7 in their last 8 games in Miami. That goes back to Brady, Belichick years. I mean, it's been a long time since the Patriots have really been able to sustain success in Miami. So I'm wide open on this one. This is one of these, and we'll get to this as we get into deeper into the show. But to me, I have a lot of clarity this week on running back. I have a lot of clarity this week on tight end and defense. And then the passing attacks are kind of like nothing really separates from me, right? And so we have this tendency to then be like, oh, well, black and white thinking, let me pick one that I think is going to be the one that hits. Whereas realistically, what I want to do this week is say, there's a lot of places that are ranked pretty evenly to me. And so I want to allow them to be pretty even to me. So kind of below that threshold of stuff, I have this Patriots-Dolphins game where I'm like, you know what? This has so many interesting ways to play out, where the Patriots played really passively on defense this last week. That's not a great setup against a team like the Dolphins. And then the Dolphins are coming back to Miami. The Patriots are having to go to Miami. Like, there is an opportunity here for the Dolphins to bounce back, and for the Patriots to then have to respond against a pretty bad secondary here. So, yeah, I think there's a broad range of outcomes. I think this is an MME game where you're like, man, in large field tournaments, I want to have a little exposure here. But I do think that there's a chance that this is just a spiral for the Dolphins. There's a chance that Mike McDaniel is fired by week 4 or 5, and, we look back on this as a lost season for them. I think that's actually likelier, but I think we still need to account for, hey, it's 1 week, and they're going back to Miami. It's a tough place for opponents to play. Crazy things can happen.
Let's use that to transition into a slate overview here, kind of looking at all of this from a macro perspective. I'll get some of the game lines pulled up here, which can kind of give us a starting point for walking through this. We do have a game, at least it opened with a total over 50. It looks like it's ticked back down underneath it with Jags and Bengals. We have some bounce back spots. The Lions not having to play on the road at Green Bay is going to be a boon for them. Obviously, the Titans don't have to play the Broncos again. But what kind of games and slate dynamics are jumping out to you?
Yeah, well, we got a lot of games where we have a lot of spots where one team is expected to do well. So whether that's the Cardinals or the Cowboys or the Ravens, we don't have a lot of spots where both teams are expected to push each other. And so we have kind of closer, lower scoring games in terms of just, expectations coming out of Vegas. We have these, kind of wider spread games where one team is implied to score 25, 26 points, whatever it might be. And then we have this Bengals and Jags game where it's like, oh, this game could be 2 teams pushing each other. So I do want to think about the games with lower implied team totals, like the Patriots versus the Dolphins, where it could skew to the upside. I want to think about the games that have the larger spreads, but could actually play a lot closer. I think that the Jets and Bills is one of those because of the way that those teams match up. And then we want to think about, the spots where one team is expected to do well, and think about, is it concentrated enough that we don't need the blow up game, or is it possible, the Cowboys a couple of years ago when Dak was healthy, they had 4 or 5 like blowout wins in Dallas where they just continued pouring on points and throwing the ball deep into the game. That was Mike McCarthy. This is Brian Schottenheimer. So we'll have to see if that happens here. And the Giants have that defensive front that could still slow down this game environment. But we want to be looking for spots like that where it's like, could a team win with 40 points even though the other team isn't pushing them? And then if we don't see that, we want to say, okay, where do we have these spots where the two teams could push each other and we could have that type of shootout? So Jags and Bengals is the clearest spot for that, but it has its own problems along with, there's a reason that line's been bet down in that game.
Week 1 was obviously really low scoring, even going and looking at the winning tournament scores. Like, it was one of the more low scoring slates. There wasn't like a single player you absolutely had to have. We saw Fields and Wilson stacks get there, Pittman and Daniel Jones stacks get there. Does that macro, do you think, carry over at all into week 2 on like a lower scoring slate? Does that make you more willing to lean into a single game environment, being like, hey, there probably won't be a lot of big games shooting out. Let me try to nail the one that does. Or is any of that factoring into your decision making?
Yeah, that's something that Hilo talked about a lot last week, that we weren't likely to get a lot of shootouts. So if you got the one that did shoot out, which we didn't really end up getting one, but if you got the one that did shoot out, it would really separate from the field. I think that'll still be the case. No preseason. Most of these guys are not playing in the preseason. It's 3 preseason games now. And these guys used to have the first 2 weeks of practice, they would have more padded practices, literally more padded practices than these teams get in the entire year now. So where that really hurts is tackling, but where that also really hurts is blocking, because a lot of that is continuity and the timing on the passing stuff. Like, you can get all of that, but in terms of like blocking, right? I was listening to Brady this morning on Colin Cowherd, and he was talking about inevitably the best teams in the NFL are going to win on the line of scrimmage. Over time, the best teams in the NFL are always going to win on the line of scrimmage. Well, if the line of scrimmage is where you're having problems early in the season, that's going to lower the scoring, right? And so, I do think that we see lower scoring early in the season just as a byproduct of, what the union rules are now for players practicing and all that. And so it takes a little bit longer for them to get up to speed. And like you said, then if one game does shoot out, it ends up separating quite a bit from the others. But, we still get a sample size of one game. It's not going to be shocking if the Cowboys come out and score 40 and the Ravens score 41 and we get 2 shootouts to go along with that, right? So, like, I don't think that we need to overrate that, but yeah, that should be in the backs of our minds of, okay, like, if it's always mathematically better to find a game environment that hits, right? The chances are a little bit higher this week than normal that finding that right game environment will completely separate from everything. But that should always be part of our thinking, is finding those game environments, just because the math makes so much sense doing that. And we'll probably touch on that a little bit later when we talk about maybe like Cardinal stuff versus Jalen Hurts, but the math component there. But yeah, we always want to be looking for that anyway, but definitely on a week like this, that could separate a little bit more.
Yeah, and like you said, not overfitting to just a single slate is important, because, like, as an example, right, if that Ravens-Bills game was on the main slate and you stacked up Josh Allen with Keon Coleman and brought it back with Derrick Henry and Zay Flowers, you would have won every tournament, just with that block of 4 players, because that was the game of the week. It just happened not to be on the main slate. Let's go ahead and start with quarterback, as we always do here. Always a lot of angles to go with. I normally start at the top, but let's actually start at the bottom this week, because we do have Mac Jones, who is going to be starting for the Niners. We have Brock Purdy out anywhere from 2 to 5 weeks with this turf toe. And of course, DraftKings salaries came out in advance of this news. So JM, we have one Mr. Mac Jones, a familiar face, the Patriots back up on the Jags. He's the stone minimum, 4K. Is Mac Jones in play this week?
Yeah, Mac Jones is in play. So Mac Jones is in play in part because when I go through the higher priced quarterbacks, I don't see a lot of quarterbacks who I'm scared to miss out on. We go through Josh Allen last year. He puts up these monster games, but the way that they're calling his offense now, most weeks he's going to score sub 20 DraftKings points, 22 DraftKings points, 23 DraftKings points. Lamar Jackson, the last time he topped 29 DraftKings points against Cleveland was COVID year, so 2020. Jalen Hurts frequently gets up to like 25. He gets up there more frequently than anybody else, that 25 to like 32 point range, but he rarely goes above it, and he rarely takes somebody with him. So you get just one spot right instead of multiple spots right. And then if Trevor Lawrence, doesn't recapture 2022 form, do we really expect this Bengals and Jags game to shoot out? We're still waiting for Trevor Lawrence to look like Trevor Lawrence did in the back half of 2022, half of a season of his career. If he looks more like he did last week, then this becomes kind of this, 24 to 27 type game where neither quarterback is really popping up. So yeah, I think that there's a world in which a lot of the higher priced quarterbacks are scoring 18, 22, 24, 25. And if you get 18 to 20 from Mac Jones, who is a capable NFL quarterback, right? Like he won Rookie of the Year. He took his team to the playoffs. Then he ended up with Matt Patricia and Joe Judge as his offensive coordinators, and then Bill O'Brien, and cycled through all this stuff. But, I think we talked about this on this show last week. Brian Thomas Jr. did not play well with Trevor Lawrence last year. That was not Brian Thomas Jr.'s fault.
Mac Jones spamming him with targets.
Yeah, his games down the stretch was where we're like, man, Brian Thomas Jr. is that guy. It was the last 6 games with Mac Jones throwing in the ball. This is, all reports were this was who Kyle Shanahan wanted the year they took Trey Lance. So he got the backup that he wanted. The big issue here, well, it's twofold. One, playing in New Orleans is tough. No matter how aging that defense is, that's a tough place to play. And then 2, the lack of weapons, right? So there's something here in terms of one of the potential weapons. I don't know if we should talk about it on the show, save it behind the paywall. Let's talk about it real quickly on the show.
Do it.
You know who was Mac Jones' favorite target with the Patriots was Kendrick Bourne.
Yeah.
Where Kendrick Bourne played the first 4 years of his career in San Francisco, where Shanahan really liked him, and he just re-signed this week. So, like, if you're Mac Jones making your first start with no weapons, what better way to help bridge that gap than to be like, hey, we brought in Kendrick Bourne last week, now we're signing him this week. Like, you've got a guy you're familiar with. Kendrick Bourne has already talked this week about how closely he and Mac have worked together for him, like getting back up to speed on the playbook, how easy it's been for him players are going to say this, but how easy it's been for him to get reintegrated in terms of remembering the terminology and how this offense works, right? I mean, he spent 4 years learning this language, so to speak. And so I think he'll be able to slide in pretty quickly now. He's been off the field. So how many snaps can he play? 30, 35 snaps. But I would think that we could see 6-7 targets, like literally could see 6-7 targets to Kendrick Bourne. He and Mac Jones are 7,500 combined. So I think that's a deep cut, right? That's something that we probably only focus on in larger field play, but I might actually have like one single entry roster that focuses on that as well, because if we see the week as a week in which maybe a lot of the quarterbacks maybe none of the high price quarterbacks, I should say, put up the type of score you had to have. Well, then all of a sudden getting 30 plus points from Mac Jones plus Kendrick Bourne, and then having so much salary left over, it differentiates your roster in a massive way. And it just gives you so much upside to be able to play around with. So yeah, no, I do think that he's in the mix. You can play him with Pearsall, you can play him with CMC, you can play him with Kendrick Bourne, and I think you can play him in single entry 3 max. If I were just building 1 or 3 rosters in a week, he wouldn't be in that pool. But like I usually put 12, 13 rosters into single entry 3 max. Last week I put 19 rosters across my single entry 3 max. And if I'm doing that, 1 or 2 of those rosters is going to be Mac Jones, I would think.
Let's kind of work our way up from Mac Jones. I mean, we had the 2 kind of week 1 winners at quarterback. They're both still priced under 5,700 this week. Justin Fields at 5,700 home versus the Jets. We have a Daniel Jones at 5,200 here, and some pretty other interesting names as well. We've already talked about Lawrence a bit. If you buy the Tua bounce back, and then Drake May getting to play this same Dolphins team that just got lit up here by the Colts. So what do you think in this sub, 5,800 range?
Yeah, what's funny is, I'm not like a Sims guy inherently, right? I'm a eye test and use my understanding of DFS strategy and theory. You got Youdacao on later, with Run the Sims, and they do an awesome job. And we've got Sims on OWS now. And I was running the Sims at the end of my my roster builds, and it was like, if I take all the rules off my pool, this is week 1. If I take all the rules off my pool, what's it going to give me? My top rosters in terms of expected ROI were all Justin Fields and Daniel Jones rosters, but I'd already put in my 150. I was like, I should put in about 25 of these. And I was like, well, I don't know what 25 to take out. I'll just leave it at that. So that would have been pretty fun last week. No on Daniel Jones to me. I'm not going to play a quarterback against the Denver defense. I think that Daniel Jones has a chance I've been saying it all offseason. I think he has a chance to do really well in this offense. This isn't the spot for me to chase it. Like we already talked about the Tua and Drake May one. Like my thing with Drake May is he threw it 46 times. I promise you that's not what the Patriots want, right? So their emphasis coming into this week is going to be like, hey, let's emphasize the ground game. And so it's kind of a question of, can the Dolphins push this? If they can, I think this is a great spot for the Patriots passing attack. Justin Fields, I think we'll talk about him a little bit more later, but what I like about this spot was, I was actually saying this to Abby yesterday, as if this is what she wanted to hear from me after being away from home for 2 weeks. But I was saying to her, like, football is really 2 games, right? There's the game on the scoreboard, and then there's the game of wills. And if you can win the game of wills, a lot of time you're going to win the game of the scoreboard. Like, football is a physical sport. Most of us who have watched it our whole lives, we kind of tuned out how physical it is. But then when you really pay attention to it, it's like, man, this is like a brawl on the field, right? And so there are some teams, watching all 16 games, it was really interesting how some teams just pop differently on the screen compared to teams that are out there to play a football game, as opposed to these teams that are out there to physically try to dominate another team. And that's what Buffalo is like, right? They're built bigger. And watching that game against, or not Buffalo, Baltimore, watching that game against Buffalo, it was like, man, the Buffalo defense just looks small here, right? And this is the same mentality that the Jets, it was like that from the first play, the Steelers were a little bit surprised, like, oh, this is how physical this Jets team is going to be. This is how much they came to play. Like, the Jets are trying to have this bully ball type of mentality, like the 49ers, like the Lions, like the Steelers, like the Ravens, and they're built for it on the offensive line. So I actually think the Jets match up really well with Buffalo in terms of what Buffalo's weaknesses are and how the Jets want to play. So if the Bills jump out to a big early lead and force the Jets into a drop back passing game, that's trouble for the Jets. But if they can keep this close enough, yeah, I really think Justin Fields can do well this week. So he's an interesting one to me in here. Trevor Lawrence is an interesting one to me in here because, you know, he's going to have to drive this game environment forward. The Bengals are not an inherently aggressive team. They're a passive team. They react to what the other team does. So if we want to bet on this game environment, Trevor Lawrence has to drive it forward. I still probably prefer Burrow because the gap in pricing isn't that much, but we do need Lawrence to play well in order for this game environment to take off. So Burrow will be my focus from this game, but I'll have some trail bets on Trevor Lawrence in MME this week.
A couple of these other pocket passers to hit on before we get to kind of the elite guys. I mentioned, Jared Goff potentially in a bounce back spot at home in a much better matchup. Caleb Williams on the opposite side of that. He ran, I think, more than any of us anticipated week one. And then you also mentioned Dak Prescott here. It's been a while since we've seen them play on Thursday night, but not the worst matchup at home here against the Giants. Any thoughts on those guys?
Yeah, I've been sort of all around on Goff. I think he's not going to be on my tighter pool, but he'll be in my MME pool because I do think just when we think psychologically how the Lions are going to attack this game, like, again, this is, remember the game where the Bengals, this super passive team that's never proactively aggressive. And then it was whatever it was, 2021, where they came out against the Ravens and they just kept their foot on the gas all game long and just blew out the Ravens. And it was like, whoa, nobody saw that coming from the Bengals. And then they did it again. I think it was later in the same year. And there's this component of when you're playing a divisional opponent, there is that psychological component of when you get your foot on their neck, you want to keep it there, right? And that's very much a Dan Campbell mentality coming into this game against Chicago. So yeah, no, I expect the Lions to be aggressive here. I just wonder, it's a 1 week sample size, but given how Caleb Williams looked and, his inability to read the field in this offense and the poor decisions that he made a few times, and then just the bad throws that he made a few times, it does make me curious if the Bears can keep up here, or if this is something where it's like, it's going to take until week 7, 8, 9, and then all of a sudden Caleb Williams is going to start sparking in this offense. I mean, the physical tools pop so much from Caleb Williams, right?
Yeah.
And we know that Ben Johnson knows what he's doing. But the problem is that Caleb Williams has literally never had to be like that Brady or Manning type quarterback that just overstudies and knows everything. It's rare to have like a Mahomes or Josh Allen who is so physically gifted and also does that intense amount of study and is like a head and shoulders above everybody between the ears. So if they can get Caleb Williams there, he can be a tremendous like tournament winning quarterback for us, right? I just don't know if he's there quite yet. And it would be a big leap from week 1 to week 2. So we also have to throw in like week 1s can be weird and maybe he does have it already. So I'm not really going to Caleb. Maybe I'll have like 2% in large field play. I kind of want to see it first, or at least see signs of it first. And then that makes you question, like, how many pass attempts does Goff really need? So I think that Goff is interesting from a ceiling perspective because of how I expect the Lions to approach this game. I don't know that he quite gets to that tournament winning type score, but I think it's within the realm of possibilities. And then, yeah, Dak Prescott, it's just at home against the Giants who have a pretty bad secondary, and the Cowboys looked good, right? They could have won that game against Philadelphia. And so if they can bring that same intensity to the field here and not just take the Giants for granted, they have an opportunity to have one of these like 40-13 type of games where Dak's just throwing and throwing and throwing. You go back to the game logs from 2 years ago, like Dak's biggest games were almost all in blowout wins at home. And so I think that's a possibility. On the flip side, you've got Abdul Carter and you've got Dexter Lawrence, you've got Brian Burns, you've got Kayvon Thibodeau. Like that's a difficult defensive line to deal with, right? So they could just manhandle the Cowboys offensive line. It's a lot of short passing. It's a lower scoring game. I could see it going either way, but I want exposure to this spot. And it's kind of, I know some people probably listen to this and are like, oh, JM's equivocating. He like isn't taking a stand on anything. That's because that's how I'm playing this week, right? I don't want to take something where it's like, I don't see separation here, but I'm going to force separation, right? I see separation at some other positions. at the passing positions this week, I really don't, right? So how I want to account for that is saying like my right now, my current exposures is like 12 to 16% of this guy, 12 to 16% of this guy across like 4 or 5 different guys. And then a bunch of guys who it's like, and also 4 to 5% of this guy. And that's kind of how I'm concentrated running back and tight end and defense pool, and then sort of spread things out at quarterback and wide receiver.
Let's real quick hit on the upper end here. If you're paying up for an elite guy, we obviously have Lamar and Allen coming off of monster games, Joe Burrow in a bounce back spot at home versus the Jags. Of course, Jalen Hurts always in play in a pretty good game environment here versus KC. Any thoughts on the high end?
Yeah, so I think the thing with Lamar and Josh Allen, I think they both have pretty clear shots at like 25 to 28 points. It's going to be harder for them to put up like a score you couldn't win without. And also, there's just this math component. We'll touch on it really quickly. I went deeper into this in the Angles podcast last week on the OWS YouTube and podcast feed, but just really quickly. So if you just generally speaking, DraftKings is going to price guys so that they're going to hit 4x their salary 25% of the time, really like 20 to 25%. We'll say 25% for the math here. So if Jalen Hurts is going to hit, like he's hit for like 26 plus points in almost 50% of his last 13 games, 6 of his last 13 games, right? That's tremendous. Let's just say Jalen Hurts is going to hit for a tournament winning score, like a tourney viable score, 4x his salary 50% of the time. If you take him without a stacking partner, right? You just say play Jalen Hurts naked and then play him with 2 uncorrelated players who are going to hit 25% of the time, your chances of them all hitting together are 3%, because it's 25% of 50% and then 25% of that. So your chance of getting Jalen Hurts plus 2 other spots right is 3% if these are uncorrelated players. Kyler Murray plus Marvin Harrison Jr. plus Trey McBride hit together 18% of games last year when they all played, right? And so that's where the math of like Hurts is going to hit more often than Kyler, but when Kyler hits, you're getting 3 spots right, and so that's where the math just doesn't make as much sense on a Jalen Hurts. And I've gone from like, my exposures went from like 40% Hurts, and when I was mapping things out earlier in the week to like 20% to now he's like in the same range as these other guys, maybe a little bit below. And I think I'm mostly playing with AJ Brown and just hope for like that huge game, right, that they can have. And a lot of AJ Brown's biggest games came with Hurts kind of underperforming because he wasn't running as much. So It's sort of a weird setup there where I think Hurts has the highest probability of any of these quarterbacks of putting up like a 28 to 30 point score, but mathematically that actually helps you less than some of these other guys. So I prefer a Kyler or a Burrow over Hurts this week, just from that perspective of like where the math actually works in your favor.
Yeah, I love that note, because like you said, it's both intuitive and counterintuitive. And we actually deal with that a lot with their ADPs in the underdog draft games as well, right? They'll be first round picks in these, and you're paying that premium for the rushing upside. That's the premium you're paying. But when they do hit that rushing upside, it makes them less likely to bring along their pass catchers. And so even though your brain wants to, gravitate to stacking, it's like, holy cow, AJ Brown is, available in the 3rd round of these drafts. Let me stack him up with Hurts. It's like, if you get the uber ceiling from Hurts, it probably is going to come at the expense of an uber ceiling game for AJ Brown. So yeah, I think that's a really good shout there, and also proves why pricing is so important, right? We see Fields and Daniel Jones last week get there as these rushing quarterbacks. They were able to bring along pass catchers, not that they went for 30 plus, but because the salary cap allowed you to stack them more cheaply, It actually becomes more viable. Whereas the Hurts prices will put a strain on your salary cap.
Yeah. 100%.
All right, let's head over to the running back position. I would say, similar to last week, pretty tight pricing. I don't see a ton of like smash value plays, sub 6K, obviously some interesting stuff up top, but where do you initially gravitate to at the running back position?
Up top, Christian McCaffrey stands out the most, because obviously the Saints are going to try to clog those rushing lanes. His over under for rushing yards on sportsbooks is like, at least as far as yesterday, it was like 89.5, which is tremendously high for a guy who like the whole defense knows he's going to get the ball. And then he's obviously going to be involved in the passing game as well. So the 49ers, they're going to be without Purdy for a few weeks. So similar to last year with Malik Willis and the Packers, you got to figure out how to win with this guy, with Mac Jones, and without these weapons, because they have aspirations of making it to the playoffs, going to the Super Bowl, winning this really tough division. And this is an important, you can't drop a game to the Saints and then, be in this division with Seattle and with, Seattle, who really should have won that game. And be in that division with Seattle and Arizona, who's up and coming, and the Rams, who are Super Bowl contenders. And they've got to win this game. And I think that leaning on Christian McCaffrey is going to be a big part of that. So to me, just saying bet on the usage that's the easiest place to go there. And then the next guy whose usage I most clearly want to bet on is Chase Brown, who really was the only running. I think he was the only running back to get a touch for the Bengals last week. Maybe P. Ryan had one touch. But yeah, Chase Brown is just so central to that offense right now. I like the Jags defense. I think they've got a lot that they're working with. I think Anthony Campanelli is a good defensive coordinator. We're going to see that throughout the year. But this is just a spot where you expect points to be scored. Even if it's not a shootout, there's going to be points scored, and Chase Brown's going to be involved. So just betting on the workload on those two guys is my favorite way to go up at the top.
Yep. I like those two as well. I'm guessing the kind of Henry and Barkley conversation really dovetails with the Hurts and Lamar combo, where it's like you're paying such a premium. They're liable to get vultured at the goal line, might not catch a lot of passes. Is it just kind of the reward isn't worth the risk at those prices?
Yeah, I mean, Cleveland is a above average run defense. Kansas City is an excellent run defense. And if I'm thinking about how both of these teams want to force the opponent to beat them, it's, force them to win through the air. It's funny because you're talking about Jalen Hurts, who's done a great job, and you're talking about Lamar Jackson, who's, almost 3-time MVP. But realistically, if you can say, let's take away the run, let's make them one-dimensional, that's going to help them out, and then force Hurts to make those throws downfield to A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. So I just think the pathways to one of these guys putting up a score you couldn't win without are pretty low. And so for me, it's always whatever. It's always dangerous to say stuff like this because in my mind, we're playing a math game, right? We're playing what would make me the most money over time. One of these guys smashes this week, then you get people like, oh, you told me not to play him, right? For me personally, I'm not playing either of these guys this week, right? It's very much within their range of outcomes that they could hit for a big game. It's just not as likely. And so there are other places where I feel a lot more comfortable that the math is working in my favor this week. So yeah, both these guys, not to say that I would argue against putting them on 10% of rosters or something, but both these guys are just off of my pool this week. Henry has been more back and forth than Saquon. Saquon hasn't even really been in consideration for me on this particular slate.
I'm curious what the field's going to do with Achane, obviously have the kind of stink of how the Dolphins looked overall. He still had really good usage. Ollie Gordon, not much of a factor. Jalen Wright, inactive. Thoughts on Achane at 6,900 here against the Patriots?
Yeah, so you're essentially betting on his pass game usage because we saw what the Patriots did to Ashton Genty last week. I expect the Patriots to be a really stout run defense. And so Achane can hit for a big play, but I don't think his per carry efficiency is going to be there. And so that lowers the chances of him hitting for a big play on the ground. And then I do think with no Christian Gonzalez, I think it's going to be a little bit easier for them to throw it to Tyreek and Waddle in the intermediate areas as opposed to having to just dump it off to Achane. So I'm a little bit less high on him than I was last week, where it was just like, man, the usage is so good, put him in there. But he's still very much like in that second or third tier of my running back pool this week. So he's in that mix for me, but he's not climbing up to the top of the pool for me this week.
Some other guys up here that I think are going to catch some ownership. We get James Conner in a pretty favorable matchup at home versus Carolina. Jahmyr Gibbs, I don't think people are going to be scared off by the week one stat line, just kind of knowing that matchup and how explosive he is at home in the dome. I think you could toss Jonathan Taylor in there, although people might be scared of the Denver matchup. Any thoughts on those guys in the high sixes and low sevens?
Yeah, I'm not interested in anybody against Denver, but the Gibbs, I won't argue against him, but I won't play him this week. So my thing is, there's been a lot of suppositions that he's so good that the Lions are going to expand his role this year, but it wasn't so much the Lions being like, yeah, we're going to expand his. I mean, they talked about him getting more downfield work and stuff like that. John Morton wanted to get him in space, but it wasn't like, oh, he's going to be a 65% back. Well, he was a 65% back in week one, but they were trailing the whole game. He was a 62% back in week two last year when they were trailing the whole game to the Bucs and threw the ball a bunch. So it's hard to separate that of like, is this because this year they want to use him more, or is this because they were trailing that whole game? So Gibbs, it's just he put like one solid score last year when Montgomery played. And so I will not at all he's so good. I will not at all be surprised if he puts up 22, 25 points, but like, I'm not scared of him putting up like a 35 or 38 pointer and me falling way behind the field. If he puts up 22 to 25, that's a score that everybody who rostered him, they're happy with that score. But everybody who didn't roster him, they're like, that's fine. Like that's a non-factor for me. I can still win a tournament without that. So that's where I see Gibbs falling, is either shy of what people need or in line with what people need. And I don't see him going above and beyond what people need, or at least not at a high hit rate. And so he's one that I'm leaving out of my pool. And then James Conner, Trey Benson did have that. And that's a one where the team did talk a lot. Like Jonathan Gannon said, we have 2 number 1 backs, right? And so obviously James Conner is the lead, but they did give Trey Benson more work than he got in past years. And James Conner's not an explosive guy. So his real value is the consistency of like the down-to-down consistency. He's a guy who's always going to get those 4 or 5 yards. He can catch passes, all that. So yeah, I'm on board with the Arizona offense this week. And that's why I'll have some Conner exposure, but he's not in my running back pool in a way where I'm like, oh, I want to play this guy, if that makes sense. I'm going to have Conner exposure because I want to play the Cardinals off a concentrated offense that should do well in this spot. So I'll have plenty of Cardinals exposure, and that's where I'll have my James Conner exposure, but it's less because I'm isolating him as a guy I want to play.
Let's talk sub 6K. There are a few interesting names down here. We might also save a name or two for the building blocks coming later if you are worried about us not getting to everyone. But Tony Pollard, Javonte Williams, Travis Etienne, those would be kind of the 3 names sub 6K here that I would flag. Any of those interesting to you?
Yeah, Pollard and Javonte are like guys who pop in optimizers because of the workload. And it's just like workload is so valuable at running back. Look, the Rams are not the Broncos, but they're pretty close. You know, when you talk like who are the 2 or 3 defenses you wouldn't want to start your career against as Cam Ward, it's the Broncos and the Rams. And by the way, man, Cam Ward looked pretty awesome, like in terms of tools and whatnot. He's going to have some big games this year. I don't think this is the week where Tennessee breaks out just because the Rams defense is so good. So Pollard, I'm off. Javonte Williams, I'm totally fine with somebody who wants to play him, but it's hard for me to see him going over 100 rushing yards. So then, he needs the multiple touchdowns again. So probably not for me. Travis Etienne, Liam Cohen's run game is so good, right? We saw it last year with the Bucs, and it's not just the scheme. It's like part of what made Ben Johnson so good as an offensive coordinator is understanding how to keep the defense off balance, what they're looking for and what you're doing off of that. And so much of Liam Cohen's brilliance in the run game is this rhythm that he has of when to call certain run plays and how to get the defense out of position. And Travis Etienne, who I've always been kind of down on as a player, he looked really good in that system. So it was 1 week, but it's not because he had like one really long run, right? It's not because he had the long run. It's like on a down to down basis, he just looked really good in this offense. So, they got rid of Tank Bigsby. They still have Tootin. They still have Allen Jr., who was out there for a few snaps and expand his role as well. And so they like their whole running back room. I don't think Etienne is a guy that we're going to see getting like 23 touches or anything. But at this price tag is a guy I think will get minimum 14 and probably more like 16 to 18 to 20. I actually really like him this week in this spot as well.
Yeah, he definitely jumps out to me. I mean, 5,700 after what he did week 1, like you said, they trade Bigsby. I do wonder, I haven't looked much at ownership yet at this point, but he just seems like a guy that will get increasingly popular by kickoff. Any other names I didn't get to that you want to mention down here? Maybe the Giants running backs, any other sleepers for you?
Yeah, I'll throw in David Montgomery because if we think Gibbs is going to get some attention, Montgomery, like you go back to his game logs last year, it was just so consistently 13, 14, 16 points, and then the occasional 20, right? Because if you're constantly getting in that 14 to 15 point range, you have that chance to bump up to 20. He's capable of putting up like a 24, 25 pointer because he can break off longer runs. He can score multiple touchdowns. And so in a spot where I think people will be looking at Gibbs, Montgomery actually becomes interesting to me as leverage here in tournaments. So not a great play on paper, but in terms of how he helps a roster with the leverage and everything, he does actually become kind of interesting to me this week. So yeah, he's one guy that I'll shout out down here.
All right. Andrew is upset that you're spoiling his secret play.
He's probably not winning us tournaments, Andrew. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. If he does, then good on us. Nobody else is going to be with us on that one.
No, it is. I talked about this last week with Nez and John when we were reviewing the underdog slate. And it was like last year, David Montgomery was routinely like a 4th round pick. He was getting drafted in every contest. He was like, no one even drafted him at all last week, which is obviously smart against that tough Green Bay defense. But this is still a guy. The thesis is unchanged. The guy who can steal those 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, there's a lot of suppositions about where his workload's going, where Gibbs' workload is going. But I think that's more from the fantasy community than from the team itself. And so I think we still see maybe not quite the consistency because you talk to any players in the NFL, who are the 2 best young running backs? It's Gibbs and Bijan Robinson, right? Everybody says that. Like Gibbs is that guy, but also the Lions are trying to go to the Super Bowl, right? They need Gibbs healthy all season. So they got to win each game, but they also got to stay healthy. And this 1-2 punch is part of that. So I think Montgomery's role could go down a little bit, but I don't think it's going to go down as much as people are kind of assuming here in the way that they're approaching him in DFS.
Before we transition to wide receiver, let's let the people know what's going on over at 1 Week Season. Hopefully you guys all took advantage of the free preview last week. Am I correct, JM? You got to pay up going forward now.
Yeah, everything's behind the paywall now. We got to protect our subscribers who pay their money and put everything behind the paywall. Yeah, we've got props weekly pass is normally $19. It's $9 right now. We were 2-1 last night in props. We were 5-2 in week 1. So all you got to do is hang out in there and get the bets from us. Our team is doing all the research and looking at man coverage versus zone coverage splits and usage and going deep dive and all that to find the best props. So that was a Caleb Johnson under rushing yards last week, a Spencer Rattler over pass attempts. So there are edges out there. And so that's $9 this week. And then 20% off with code Pete on, anything on the site, whether that's, we even have the OWS for life. If you've used OWS and you're like, I'm going to stick around for the next few years, that would pay for itself within like 3.5 seasons. And so if you think you're going to keep playing DFS and stick around with OWS, that's there. Season pass, all access with the optimizer, week pass, month pass, whatever you want. Use that code Pete, 20% off.
Yep. Take advantage of that. They have the edge breakdowns for each of those games. And then my favorite there, the scroll. In JM, you're also doing your weekly diary in the Discord as well. I've enjoyed reading that, seeing kind of how your thoughts evolve on the slate. So yeah, go check it out. 1 Week Season. We got a link pinned in the chat. I got them down in this description. Go pick which sub makes the most sense for you. Take that test drive with the weekly pass or dive in. Promo code Pete, though, will get you that 20% off. All right, let's head over to wide receiver. Let's kind of start at wide receiver where we started with quarterback at the kind of uber value. So we have Travis Kelce takes out Xavier Worthy, which then thrusts Hollywood Brown into the wide receiver 1 position. He has 16 targets, I believe it was, last week, and now he is certainly underpriced relative to that role he had. Thoughts on Hollywood Brown, who I envision is going to be very, very popular this week at 5,200.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, we're playing a number 2 receiver, 2.5 receiver who's having to step into a number 1 role against a top defense in football. So yeah, to me, it doesn't stand out as like some sort of smash play. He's not going to get 16 targets again this week, right? Like I think a normal range for him would be something like a typical game would be like 7 catches for 65 yards. And then if things go really well, maybe he hits a long play, right? They use him on a downfield route. We saw the Juju Smith-Schuster weeks in the past where he would have like 9 catches for 113 yards. And then a week later, he would have, 4 catches for 30 yards. So I don't think that them pivoting mid-game based on an injury that happened, Xavier Worthy was surely a big part of their game plan. They had to adjust on the fly. I don't think that Hollywood Brown is going to step into a 16 target per game role. He's not that guy, right? So to me, there are other guys in this 5K to 6K range who are better on paper plays, but Marquise Brown is totally fine. He's actually got the Hollywood now in DraftKings. So maybe we're just straight Hollywood Brown at this point. But yeah, he's a totally fine play to me. Like he's not one where I'm like, oh, people are dumb for playing him at high ownership. Like he's going to be involved. But he's going to be involved on an offense that isn't expected to score a ton of points against a tremendous defense. One thing I do like about this game is you have basically 2 heavyweights, right? And so you have 2 teams that are not like last week. I go from watching, I think I watched the Jags-Panthers game, and then right after that, I watched the Titans-Broncos game. Jags-Panthers game, the Jags went for it on 4th and short from their own 38-yard line on the first drive of the game. Then you flip over to the Titans, and every time it's like 3rd and 6, they're running the ball, right? Where they're like, hey, we got a rookie quarterback. We're playing the Broncos defense. Let's just play things safely. And so, like, what I like about this game is the Chiefs and Eagles are not going to have that mindset. They're going to have this mindset of like, we're coming out swinging. Every time we get the ball, we're being aggressive. We're trying to march the field. And if there's an opportunity for a big play, we're going to try to hit it. So, no, I think the opportunity is there for Hollywood Brown to put up 20, even 25 points. But I think most times we play out the slate, he puts up, 12, 13 points, something like that. So I think he's a fine play. He's not a standout play to me.
Let's go back to the top end, and obviously there's always just so much ground to cover at wide receiver. The pool is so deep here. But on the high end, what stands out to you? We of course have the Bengals wide receivers, Puka coming off of a massive target share game, CeeDee Lamb, Neighbors, Amon-Ra, Brian Thomas. Who at the top end intrigues you?
Well, so one of the things I want to highlight here is that it's very rare for these super high-priced wide receivers with pocket passers to go for a tournament-winning game without their quarterback also going for a tournament-winning game. So I ran the numbers. I think I put them in the journal, and I'll probably have them in the player grid. So I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's basically like over 80% of the time, 85% of the time when Jamar Chase hits for a tournament winner, when CeeDee Lamb hits for a tournament winner, Burrow, Dak are hitting for a tournament winner. So it's always flabbergasting to me to see just the sheer volume of rosters that play these guys as one-offs when it just rarely makes sense, right? And so that's an edge for us. It doesn't mean that they can't hit independent of their quarterback. It just means that the field plays that at such a high rate and it happens at such a low rate that there is edge and just kind of always or almost always. Like I'll probably have rules that say 85% of Jamar Chase rosters have to have Burrow, 85% of CeeDee Lamb rosters have to have Dak, and that's where I'll get my exposure to those guys. Puka, he hit on this last week. I think he had like one monster game last year and then a couple other solid games, constantly in like that 20-point range. But in terms of what you wanted his price tag, only a couple of those. And there was like his big game was a shootout against the Bills, right? It was whatever it was, 44-42 in that game. So, Puka, I think against what's really a good Tennessee defense, it's harder for me to see him having a huge game. I will say, I think it was Jarvis Brownlee on the Titans defense was a serious weak link at corner and just got picked on relentlessly and then got hurt at the end of the game. So I haven't looked at the injury report to see if he's playing this week or not, but you have to assume that whoever's behind him is worse than him. So yeah, like Puka and Devontae Adams, who really, I think Devontae's going to have some of these monster games this year. He's going to be priced over 7K by the end of the season. And I think people just don't see it yet because they haven't seen it yet, right? But they really want to have him involved in this offense, and he already has a good connection with Stafford. So I think that you could go to the Rams wideouts. It's not the best. I don't expect a lot of scoring, and it's not the best matchup in terms of overall defense that they're playing, but I think they're fine plays. But, really nothing stands out to me up here as a one-off until we get to maybe Brian Thomas Jr., who, again, like he and Trevor Lawrence have not meshed well. That's not Brian Thomas Jr.'s fault, but it can still happen, right? And we can't overrate what we saw in 1 week with a new coach. And so Brian Thomas Jr., AJ Brown, we already touched on him, and Garrett Wilson, who, I started thinking about this more last night, where DJ Moore put up some monster scores with Justin Fields. And I was looking through those game logs last night. Some of them were 35 pass attempts, 32 pass attempts, which we're not going to see as many of that, but we do know that Fields is fine latching onto one pass catcher. He obviously has a connection with Garrett Wilson going back to Ohio State. And so I think that even if Fields throws it 25 times, we could see double-digit Garrett Wilson targets. And, there's so much negativity around Fields as a thrower that we forget he has actually produced big games for wide receivers pretty consistently. So I think Garrett Wilson's kind of an interesting one-off in here as well.
We have a couple guys coming off of pretty big usage games. JSN clearly operating as the wide receiver one there for Seattle. Zay Flowers dominating targets there for Baltimore. Any of these guys in the low sixes that jump out to you?
Yeah, there's a bunch of guys down here who, again, at this time of year, one of the ways I like to define it is where I think prices are going to be later in the year. So I think we're going to be paying 6.9K or more for JSN. I think we're going to be paying 7K or more for Zay Flowers. I think we're going to be paying 7K or more for Devontae Adams. I think we're going to be paying like 6,500 or more for Jamison Williams. There was somebody else. Oh, Roma Dunze. I think we're going to be paying like at least 6,200 for him. He's 4,800. So there are some guys down here who is just like, and Teteroa McMillan. I think he'll be like, it depends on what Bryce Young can do, but 6.5K or more for Teteroa McMillan. So there are some guys down here where in a week where nothing's really separating for me at wide receiver, that's one of the ways I'm wanting to think about things is, okay, who's in a fine matchup and is going to be priced higher later? And so among those guys I just mentioned, no one really stands out to me above the other. JSN, the usage was there, but some of these other guys, the usage will be there this week, right? Maybe JSN is going to have 7 targets this week. I will say with JSN, the Steelers secondary really looked their age last week. Darius Slay and Jalen Ramsey, and like it looked older, and they're going to play well, but like, is JSN just going to be open, in the intermediate area all day? And I could see that. Like, I could see him having like a pretty gritty, like 9 for 110 or something like that on this slate. So, but yeah, I like all those guys I just mentioned. I like all of them. And I don't see any like one thing that clearly separates one guy from that pack, right? So from the way I'm treating it is equal exposure to all those guys. That also means my single entry 3 max is going to be kind of a grab bag of like, okay, I've got this quarterback plus 2 pass catchers. My last 2 wide receiver spots are based on, and I'm concentrated at running back, concentrated at tight end and defense. So these last 2 spots, like, mix and match these guys, whatever fits with salary. And hopefully I get the right combo on the right roster is how I'm looking at these guys.
What about when we talked about Mac Jones? You did mention Kendrick Bourne, and that was also funny too because DraftKings sent the updated email that they added him to the player pool. I don't think he was even in when they initially launched this.
He signed on Monday, so yeah,
it's crazy. I don't believe he's in the underdog pool, if I recall correctly.
I don't know. I take him an underdog, but
yeah, that would be a little thin. Ricky Pearsall, though, I assume that's who people are going to want to gravitate to, right? We got Jawan Jennings. I don't know if we have an updated practice report on him. He's a little banged up. Kittle's obviously out. I mean, people are going to want to play Ricky Pearsall at 5,300. And if they do go the Mac Jones route, I assume he will be the preferred stacking partner. But you didn't mention him when you were talking about Mac Jones. Thoughts on Pearsall at 53?
Yeah, I think I mentioned him in passing in terms of like, I'm fine going there too. I'm fine pairing with Pearsall. I'm fine pairing with CMC. Yeah, I didn't think about Kendrick Bourne until last night. And I've been deep in the weeds on all this all week, and it was like just going through the Bink machine optimizer and like, okay, is there anybody I'm missing? And it was like, Kendrick Bourne, what the hell? I started thinking through it and diving deep into that. I think Pearsall is a perfectly fine way to go here as well. Like I said, the matchup isn't great. It's not bad. But, it's just playing in New Orleans against a defense that's like aging, but they still have Brandon Staley, who's a good defensive coordinator, even if he's not a good head coach. They still have Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, who are, future Hall of Famers. At least Cam Jordan is, and maybe Demario Davis. So like they've got guys there who are going to elevate that team as a whole, right? And we see that. So like there's so much about like the energy, the focus, the intensity. The Commanders were supposed to have an awful defense last year, and you bring in Bobby Wagner, and that just makes a difference having a guy like that. So yeah, I do think the Saints will still be competitive here. But no, I think Pearsall is a perfectly fine play in this range, and I'll have some exposure to him both as a one-off and with Mac Jones this week.
I'm just going to bounce around a little bit here. One guy I want to get your thoughts on. It doesn't look like he's trending to be super popular. So maybe the field's not buying it. Keon Coleman coming off of a massive game, 11 targets, had a TD, was close to another. Obviously this was a shootout game and that kind of lifted all boats, but are you buying or selling a year 2 leap for Keon Coleman?
I'm buying a year 2 leap. I'm just probabilistically, so the chance of him having back-to-back big games, this is an isolated situation, right? The chance of getting heads 2 times in a row, that second flip is completely isolated from the first flip, right? So the chance of Keon Coleman, this isn't completely isolated because teams watch film and they're like, okay, we got to focus on this guy, but the chance of him having a second game really is independent, like in a row is independent. It's just rare, right? And we typically see people chasing the box score. The other thing we've seen over the last few years is people not chasing the box score because they don't want to look like a fish, right? And so in those situations, if the ownership starts coming in really low on him, which you're saying it's starting to look like, that is a place where I might bump up my exposure a bit because I do buy the second year breakout for him. I just think the chance of it happening in a second consecutive week, it's not where I just want to go. And what I was kind of hoping was like, he would have kind of a mediocre week this week, maybe the next couple of weeks, and then people start forgetting about him. And then it's like, man, we better start playing Keon Coleman again because that next blow-up game is coming. But I do buy the breakout. It's still going to be a team that spreads the ball around, but he's going to hit some big plays. Like I could see him being priced over 6K by the end of the season for sure.
I got to pull up a tweet that you made the other day because this is another spot I want to talk about. We have Calvin Ridley priced under 5K, 4,900, and you calling your shot that, Cam Ward with either Ridley, Ellick are going to take down a tournament at some time this year. I know you're not super hype on this matchup here versus the Rams, but you want to talk about maybe getting early to the Cam Ward breakout?
Yeah, the way I've approached these things in the past is I generally say, like, I don't like this matchup, but I don't want to miss out. And so I'll play a little bit of it anyway. It's just been like a bleed out of money, which again, it's just sample sizes, right? That doesn't mean that's going to continue to be the case. But I do want to continue to treat things the way that I would treat things, which is like try to play the matchups where I feel most confident in the way that this game is going to play out. And so, yeah, this isn't like I have a ton of respect for this Rams defense. I think it's tremendous. And so this is not a great spot. But Cam Ward looked really good. Like I said earlier, Brian Callahan called things really conservatively, but Cam Ward was really aggressive. And then Alec Manor was wide open down the field multiple times, and they took a bunch of deep shots to him. The targets were there. The usage was there. The talent is there. Calvin Ridley had like 2 or 3 just egregious drops in this game, and hopefully he gets that back going. So no, if anybody wants to take shots on the Titans offense and MME, I think it's super sharp. But Ridley's like 4,900 and Manor is 3,100. So that's 8K, and you had the quarterback. Yeah, like I think it's great. I probably won't be on it, maybe 1% or something like that, just because it's like this isn't the spot where I think it's going to happen. But I do think it's going to happen this year, watching that offense so far.
Before we get to tight ends, just want to make sure, because there is always so much ground to cover and we can't get to everything at wide receiver. Anyone else you'd like to shout out that we won't later feature in the building blocks?
No, I mean, there's other guys I like. Well, actually, yeah, I will mention one guy, Cedric Tillman. To me, Cedric Tillman is equal to or better than Jerry Jeudy as a wide receiver. And he's always lower priced and he's always lower owned. And so Cedric Tillman, if you like that Browns passing attack, I think that's a place to go. And then there's some others, but I'll save those for the player grid. And yeah, I think we covered most of the core stuff that we would want to cover here.
Cool. Also want to mention, appreciate everybody watching live. We got almost 500 of you. Make sure you guys subscribe to this channel. Hit that like button while you're at it. We are going to be here live every single Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern with the block party. Then around 2:15, after JM and I build our lineup, we're going to have the Run the Sims crew coming by, Youdacao and Brian Hooper. We'll do some sim stuff, pick Yuda's brain about the things he's seeing. And then immediately following that at 3 p.m. Eastern, I have Off and On the Clock with the Badge Bros. My guy John is traveling today, but it'll be Nez and I running a little 2-man game there, breaking down everything for week 2 from an underdog perspective and a DraftKings perspective. So about 3.5 hours of non-stop DFS content for you guys on Fridays. But Jam, let's do tight ends. I always mention you tend to groan when we get to this position. We don't have George Kittle on the slate. We don't have Brock Bowers on the slate. We do have Trey McBride. We do have Harold Fannin Jr. Is there anything else you can get excited about here at tight end?
Yeah, I mean, I think David Njoku is still in the mix, right? He was out there all the time. He's playing a different position than Fannin, realistically. And so I think like those are kind of the 3 guys to me. It's McBride and Fannin and Njoku. And then there's some others that's like, I played a little Jonnu Smith last week because why wouldn't you? With Arthur Smith reuniting with Jonnu Smith, I think that's always in play. I think Hunter Henry's in play. I think that Ty Warren is the one guy in the culture. I'm like, I could see myself playing him because they were really emphasizing him last week, but I hate the matchup there. Sam Laporta, probably going to go over like 20 points once all season, but he's consistently going to be like 13, 16 points, 17 points in that range. So there's plenty of guys to like. And there's a clear, Juwan Johnson, it was, I think 12 targets last week. It was clearly like a preferred target of Spencer Rattler, but terrible matchup. I think if we're going to go off those first 3 I mentioned, Brenton Strange is the next one down that I would go to because we can always pick on Logan Wilson and those Cincinnati linebackers in pass coverage. And Brenton Strange is part of this offense, basically. He's not like a key part, and they're not scheming a bunch of stuff to him, but he's part of this offense. He's going to be out there a lot. And so, I kind of look at it like this. If McBride puts up one of his like 12-point games and Fannin and Njoku both kind of, cannibalize each other and both end up around 12 points, there's going to be one of these tight ends that scores like 16 to 18 and outscores these guys. But I don't know that my math works in my favor to try to guess who that's going to be. And so since I feel confident with what I like at running back, I feel confident with what I like at defense, I feel confident with what I like at tight end, but I also feel like there's not a lot of separation at quarterback, wide receiver. I don't personally want to spread myself too thin at tight end this week because I'm going to hope that my concentrated bets end up hitting, or some of them end up hitting, so that then that balances off of like my spread out stuff at quarterback and wide receiver, and I can get everything right on a roster together. If I've got a bunch of Chase Brown and Christian McCaffrey and Etienne and McBride, and they're all mixed and matched together or across a bunch of rosters, and I'm mixing matching other things, then I've got a good chance of, if I get my core right, I can hit those other things. So I'll mostly focus on that core of McBride and the Browns tight ends, but I do think there are plenty of other guys that you could get onto if you're seeing certainty at other positions and you want to spread things out at tight end, I do think there are plenty of guys you could go to, but I think those three to me stand out as the clearest, like the bets that would hit the most often over time on this slate.
Yeah, and I think you're going to get, of those two, I do think McBride and Fannin, or of those three, McBride and Fannin will be fairly popular. But Njoku's going to go way overlooked. I mean, when you're having to pay $1,300 more for him relative to Fannin, I think he is going to be a pretty sneaky play just because he's not going to project that well from a points per dollar standpoint. So yeah, going back to him, despite pretty good usage, and spoiler, he's also one of my favorites on Underdog, where Fannin's going way ahead of him over there as well. I guess one name I'll throw at you before we build a lineup. If you're doing Dak Prescott stuff, any love for Jake Ferguson in there?
Yeah. So a couple of years ago when Dak and CD were clicking, a lot of those Dak plus CD games also had Ferguson, and it was all like Ferguson going for, 15 to 17 points. He's not going to put up like the 25 pointer or something like that. But yeah, it was a lot, Brandon Cooks is on that team. George Pickens is a better receiver at this point in his career than Cooks was at that point in his career. But a lot of times it wasn't two wideouts hitting. It was CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson hitting. And so that's sort of in my pool of, on my Dak rosters, I want some Jake Ferguson mixed in, but I'm probably not playing him away from those Dak rosters. And that might be how I handle Brenton Strange as well, right? Is like, throw him onto some Trevor Lawrence rosters, maybe some Burrow rosters, and then not play him otherwise. Hunter Henry, play him on some Drake May and Tua rosters in large field play, and not play him otherwise. And then focus on these other guys when I'm sort of just putting a non-correlated tight end onto a roster. And even on some of these other rosters, we'll just leave that tight end spot open for one of these other three guys.
Yeah. And I think that it's kind of an extension of the conversation we were having about those elite rushing quarterbacks too, right? With tight ends, we're mostly touchdown hunting. And if they hit that touchdown, it's going to boost the score of their pocket passer in a way that makes that stack attractive. Whereas there's so few guys that you can just bank targets at the tight end position right now, the McBride, the Brown. So it makes sense if you're one-offing, you go with those target guys. Otherwise, you want to be correlating it and getting that double dip for the touchdown. All right. It's everybody's favorite portion of the show. Let's build a lineup. All right, Jam. I'm going to kick it to you. Someone earlier in the chat was asking about a running back that we, mysteriously glossed over. Could he make an appearance here in the official Building Blocks lineup?
Yeah, when you said, let's go down under 6K, I was like, wait a second. And I was like, oh, I see what Pete's doing here. So we're calling this block the Jet 2 Holiday. This is Justin Fields and Breece Hall. And this is basically saying that this is a deeply run-centric offense, and that this offense is built to beat a team like the Bills in the way that they want to play. The Bills are undersized on defense, and the Jets are trying to be the same type of bully that some of these other teams are, where they push around undersized teams. It's kind of fun watching these games too, because the Bills are so disciplined. They're so physically and mentally tough. They're so intelligent that they are able to fight back against these bullies, but they're just undermanned in doing it. They start from a disadvantage right from the jump. And so this is another good spot for these two. And I think that there's a chance that we're seeing 25 plus carries between these two guys, plus a few catches, plus, 20 to 25 pass attempts. And so you put it all together in terms of, would you pay 11.9K for a player who's getting 25 carries and a few catches and randomly 20 to 25 pass attempts as well? And I think you would, especially in a matchup that sets up well for them. And it's a unique pairing that a lot of people aren't going to be on. And so, I like this spot as one of I've actually got 5 building blocks in the player grid this week, which is more than normal. But this is one of the ones that I liked as just kind of a unique way to put two players together onto a roster.
And I assume, Garrett Wilson obviously hit in week 1 with Fields here. Is this kind of envisioning again, hey, he runs a little bit more. It's maybe more spread out with the pass catchers, not needing to force a stack there outside of Breece Hall?
Well, yeah. And the thing is, like, Garrett Wilson scored the touchdown. If he doesn't score the touchdown, obviously he could have gotten the 100-yard bonus. He was right there. But if he doesn't score the touchdown, you can have this week where Garrett Wilson goes 7 catches for 85 yards. That's 15.5 points. But the touchdown goes to Mason Thomas or something like the touchdown goes to somebody that's just not expecting the touchdown to go to. And so Garrett Wilson doesn't get those points. Fields gets the passing touchdown, but all you really need is these two, right? I'm going to have some Fields and Garrett Wilson as well this week. I really haven't thought yet about the combo of all three. Obviously, it would have worked last week, so I think it's probably viable as well. It's kind of the high-end outcome that you really need there, but I think that's viable as well. But in just on this particular block, like I think it's just a unique one because it's uniquely put together in a way that a lot of people wouldn't have, which immediately separates it from the field to where a lot of people who would have this would throw in Garrett Wilson because quarterback, running back, wide receiver stacks are not uncommon. Quarterback running stacks are uncommon and look a little bit weird. So you actually get a little bit of edge here if the touchdowns don't flow through Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, and you also have outs with how good of a pass catcher Breece Hall is that he takes that screen pass to the house, and then you do get the double dip.
Similar to Etienne, like this was just like Breece Hall is another guy I've always been down on. Like I've been much lower on Breece Hall over his career than the field, and most of the time that's paid off. Every once in a while it hasn't, but just the way he looks healthy and he looks like a great fit in this offense. And so it was 1 week, but 1 week is what we have right now. And I felt confident enough in what I saw in that 1 week. It was like, man, Breece Hall is too cheap here, especially in a matchup where we just know that this sets up well for the Jets offense for how they want to play. And the Bills need to try to get that big lead early and force the Jets out of this game plan. Otherwise, it's going to be a dogfight the whole game.
All right, I'll ask my typical question once we start with a block. Anything you'd want to do with the Bills here or just play this exclusively through the Jets?
Yeah, let's play this one exclusively through the Jets. We're not necessarily betting on the game environment taking off so much as we're betting on the Jets being concentrated through these two guys in a matchup that suits them well in a game where they're going to know that they have to score points. And so, I'm fine going no bring back on this particular roster.
All right, we have 5,700 Fields, 6,200 Breece Hall, wide open slate. Otherwise, where are we going?
Yeah, let's go ahead and go to defense next just so we can get a feel for our pricing structure. And same as last week, I'm going to be comfortable paying a little bit higher for defense because we're not at the point in the season where you got a bunch of backups and bad players starting at quarterback. And you can, like we said last week, you want to target defenses that are going to get points, like not just defenses that are playing a good quarterback and get you 3 or 4 points, but defenses that can get you double digits. And so last week it was the Broncos on most of my roster. This week I'm fine with the Broncos because I think, they're just such a good defense, but I'm going to go Rams here against Tennessee. And again, I like Cam Ward and he's not going to be a mistake prone rookie the way that we might see in some other spots, but this Rams defense is so good that I still think it is a tough test for a rookie quarterback at 3,100. It's nice value there. And that gives us, what is this, 5,800 per position left. So kind of gives us a sense of the flexibility that we have on this roster. I think the next thing I want to do is kind of think about if there is like a sort of mini correlation that I want to do on anything. So whether that's like a Zay Flowers plus a Cleveland tight end, or maybe that is Travis Etienne. I guess we're doing Travis Etienne and we're putting in a Cincy wide receiver. We would want Burrow, so we'll skip over that one. And yeah, I don't know. From stuff we've talked through, Pete, is there anything that you're thinking about here at this point on the roster?
Do we just get this preloaded with CMC? Is he just such a smash that we
Yeah, I'm good with that. Like, I'm also fine going Etienne on this, but as we kind of said when we were going through wide receiver, there weren't a bunch of high price guys that I wanted to go to outside of stacking them with their quarterbacks, which is going to put us in this sort of 5K range where we also really liked what we were seeing down here. There's one guy that we didn't talk about before that I do want to mention is DK Metcalf. If Rodgers, I'm sure a lot of you saw the post-game press conference where Rodgers is like talking about like just blatantly like how badly he wanted to beat the Jets and he wanted to beat everybody who works for that organization. Like DK Metcalf wanted out of Seattle. So it's a little bit different. But if there's another player who plays with a chip on their shoulder, it's DK Metcalf. And I feel like Rodgers is going to try to get him a big player, a touchdown here. So I think that he's interesting here. Although, as we're talking through these kind of lower priced wideouts and sort of mini correlations, you know what I want to do here? Because we threw in CMC. So that lowers like what we need now, our eye level for pricing. Let's throw in Jameson Williams and Roma Dunze, which gives us a little mini correlation from that game. Again, I think that the Lions are going to come out trying to throw haymakers in this game. That's in their nature, especially going against Ben Johnson, a division opponent, former coach. And I think Jameson Williams is a big part of trying to throw those haymakers because those are those big shots downfield. And if the game ends up tighter, right, and like it's harder for them to hit those big plays, they're still going to be trying to throw those punches throughout. And so Jameson Williams has a shot at one of these bigger games. I think Roma Dunze will have to be involved in this spot for the Bears to keep pace. So, and that kind of frees us up to keep targeting this range of pricing that we like without sort of worrying too much about getting squeezed too tightly.
Yeah, I like that. And I love too when One thing I thought about a lot during both best ball season and as I'm drafting teams of like, if I am doing mini correlations, I really want them to be the players that actually accomplish what I'm hoping to accomplish, which is speeding up the game, big plays. And like Rome and JMO are certainly a pairing that qualifies there, as opposed to just having like a plotting running back and an opposing tight end. It's like, yes, it's a mini correlation, but is it accomplishing what we're trying to accomplish here?
100%.
I did like that Zay Flowers Cleveland tight end pairing, or do you see another way to go here?
Yeah, well, so what I want to do is I want to throw in David Njoku on this one.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be doing something a little bit different from the field by doing that. Because what I'm actually hoping to do is get to, and I think we can. Yeah. So what this actually frees us up for is to go up to AJ Brown, who is a guy who, can be priced at 7,500 later in the season. And then also still have the salary for Devontae Adams, who is another guy who I think is going to be priced over 7K by the end of the season. And so it's this interesting week where at wide receiver, we can look through and like, typically you don't want that wide receiver build where it's all like these 5K guys, because it's like, those are the guys who, yes, they can hit for big games, but they're going to do it a lot less often than the guys who are just priced a little bit more than them, right? Like the 6,500 guy is going to hit for that big game way more frequently than the 5,900 guy as we get deeper into the season. But when we can look at this and say, well, I personally think that Jameson Williams, Rome Odunze, AJ Brown, Devontae Adams are all going to be priced higher later in the year. Well, then this just gives us a nice set of exposure to all these guys on a roster together. So we could have gone a different way. We could have gone the Zay Flowers, would have put us in sort of a weird pricing range, the low 6Ks for that final wide receiver spot, maybe a Tyreek Hill or something like that. But yeah, I like this build and kind of like the way that it ties together the way I'm seeing this slate this week. Actually, I really like this build. It's a pretty nice
I know. I love this too. So to recap for our audio listeners, we go Fields and Breece Hall, the kicking off point of the block. We pay up for CMC. We get a mini correlation with Jameson Williams and Rome Odunze. We play David Njoku at tight end, and then we get in two high ceiling but perhaps underpriced wide receivers in AJ Brown, Devontae Adams, rounded out with the Rams defense. And Jam, because this is the first show of the year, I got to do my usual things here. This is one lineup. This is an exercise in thinking through lineup construction, figuring out how these pieces work together. As you could even hear, as we talked about it, there were all different kind of avenues we could go to round out this lineup. It is meant to help you generate ideas and how you think about building lineups. You should not expect to become a millionaire by submitting this lineup into a contest. And,
unless it was, what was it? Desmond Ritter and
that time Smith it did.
That was the nuts that week.
Yes. See, here we go. This is why I have to do the caveats. And again, we are recording this live on a Friday afternoon. I've been keeping my eye out for any news. We got Xavier Worthy, slim chance to play week 2. We tend to get a lot of news updates that will can shift around the slate. And this is why you guys got to be subbed to 1 week season, get JM's updated thoughts, both through his diary in the Discord and in the scroll on Sunday mornings. But always love building these with you, JM. Felt good to get back in the live saddle. Any final thoughts here for the people before we get the Run the Sims guys on?
Yeah, I just real quickly, I wanted to shout you out. We talked before we got on air, but you did such a great job last week with the big boys of Brandon Marshall and Tyrann Mathieu, Derek Carr. And I know a lot of people who were watching this probably watched that as well, but just really cool to see. And, I remember when we started working together and what I said to you at the time, I said to Abby was like, Pete's just so good at brand building, but then also having a brand to build. Right. And you're just very professional, but charismatic and personable and just really good at what you do. So it was cool to see that last week and just wanted to shout you out on that. An hour and 15 minutes of the show for people who are still watching. Praise going your way.
I appreciate that, man. Yeah, it's a surreal experience. I was telling you before the show, I am going to write about it in my newsletter that will come out tomorrow, the P.O. Box newsletter, free newsletter. If you want to subscribe to that, I'll get some behind the scenes photos and stories in there. One of the cool ones, JM, I got Brandon Marshall gave me like a blow by blow of his 21 catch game, the record for a single. It was telling me all about the moments of it, how he called his shot and all of that. That was like the most surreal thing for me, is like getting to hear those stories.
Brandon Marshall seemed to really like you. He wants to hang out. Like he wants to fly out to your place and hang out for the weekend. You guys, I think are buddies now. So
what was cool about it is this was like a surreal experience even for them. Like they're all trying to launch their post-playing careers and stuff. Yeah. So they were kind of like bright eyes too. Like it wasn't like I was the only one that was like, holy shit. They were all kind of like, oh, holy shit.
Yeah, that was very cool. Yeah, I loved it.
All right, JM, as usual, we'll catch you back on Friday for next week's. We hope to see you guys all atop the leaderboards. But now it is time to get ready for Bully the Sims. We'll see you next week, JM. All right, we got our new little Bully the Sims stinger up there, flipping the page here to talk ball, talk Sims with Youdacao and Bric75 from Run the Sims. Youda, Bric, how we doing?
Good. Cool graphic. Who did that? That was my first time seeing that.
Yeah, it was my guy Zach. Zach Lenars does a bunch of the graphics there. Always crushes it, and so he did an awesome job with that. All right, how did your guys' week one go? Youda, did you ship $1 million? Just not tell us what happened.
No, it was pretty flat. I had a little sweat in the high stakes, but overall pretty flat. I had late game Seattle Niners, so I needed one good game out of I needed 5 points more out of Kittle or Purdy, something like that, to win $1 million. So it was a good spot.
And man, you mentioned Kittle, and it was like he was going to go for 20 in that game if he didn't get hurt. Which not to twist the knife, but I know a lot of us were feeling the pain of Kittle leaving.
Sure,
early.
I mean he also his absence, really slowed the game down after that too.
True. Yeah. And they are very depleted this week. I was talking a little bit with JM about the spot. Obviously, Mac Jones, 4K on DraftKings this week. Bric, we talked about it a little bit on Lulz yesterday, but any other week one thoughts from you before we look to week two?
Oh, no, not really, Pete. Yeah, I didn't have any good sweats, so nothing interesting.
Nothing interesting there, but we have plenty of interesting things to discuss for the main slate here. Youda, I want to go to you because I know you're going to start to, now that we have some data, thinking about how you want to adjust things that you saw in week one. Did anything stand out to you, surprise you, things you want to adjust on?
I'm mostly looking at things that are long-term macro changes that are either confirmed or 180s based on coaching or personnel stuff. Those are going to be the most actionable right away and might take people longer to adjust to. But if you see a huge shift in defensive play calling or something, and DC play or the defensive play caller changed, it's probably extremely sticky and people are not necessarily going to bind that data point all the way because it's 1 week, but I think it basically stabilized just from the fact that it was a new guy calling, and now it's a new philosophy. What do you call it? Dallas going to all zone was a pretty huge shift against the Eagles, where they have a new DC, Matt Eberflus, who was a Bears coach. He played a lot of zone. He was a defensive play caller in the Colts before that, so both zone heavy spots. So it could be something like no Parsons rushing the passer. It could dictate trying to play lower variance on the back end, since you're not really that likely to get a home run play from pressure. Or it could just also be it's Eberflus. So that type of thing seems sticky to me, or Chip Kelly running a real West Coast offense in Las Vegas, throwing 70% throw rate, something like that. The things like that are going to be pretty sticky and stabilized. So I'd rather focus on those than outlier performances necessarily. I think something talent related or target share, those type of things, I'd like a few more weeks to buy into.
Yeah, and I feel that's obviously the name of the game for week 2? What do we want to wave off as noise from week 1? What do we want to adapt to? Famously last year, it's like you have the Isaiah Likely game. He goes off and then does nothing rest of the year. Or you have the Saints who look like they're going to head to the Super Bowl after 2 weeks, and then they tail off. I feel like a big one that everyone's wondering is how do you approach the Dolphins here? Because they looked awful in week 1, but now they get to play the Patriots secondary who looked awful themselves. So it's like unstoppable force meets immovable object here in the worst kind of way. Do you guys have any takes on the Dolphins?
We got the Dolphin expert over here, Brian. So
yeah, Brian, you told me you were watching the Miami Dolphins.
I wish my burner was Dolphin Addict 16.
That's right.
He's a Dolphin Addict fan. So
I did run a sim before we started, and it looks like HN is 27% in the top 150, even with Shady's portfolio. Doesn't look like we're getting any Tua currently. So it's tough to get stacks if you're not getting the quarterback.
Yeah, Youda, how do you think about that? I was talking about it a little bit with JM as far as these pass catchers with the pocket passer quarterbacks there. So like a Tua with Tyreek. If you're going that direction, do you always want to be stacking that, or is Tyreek a guy you'd be willing to play as a one-off?
You can certainly play him as a one-off, but those are actually the pocket passer quarterback is actually pretty good in DFS if it comes with the limited like target concentration or high target concentration like the Dolphins do have, or like I guess you could say like the Raiders. Mm-hmm. Since you're not going to generate anything with the quarterback legs, if everything comes through the air, they can easily just throw for like 350 for a game. You get like 70% going to 2 guys. As far as the targets, that could be quite good because you're only looking for like points from like a few positions when you're stacking. Really, you don't have to like onslaught a game. So I think those are actually good angles. And it's anytime people say the upside isn't that high, it's kind of like a perceived thing because they can't rush for a touchdown, but it's also always going to be relative to price. So if price is low enough, 30 points, 25 points, pocket QB is still great.
Brian, you mentioned running some sims earlier. I just ran the optimizer here as well. I did force a quarterback pass catcher stack. I know last week when we did it, we didn't, but as we look at some of these lineups here and you ran it earlier, did anything jump out to you or surprise you?
Well, I think this is a good opportunity to give a little demo because if you notice your top 0.1% column, everything's 0%. The reason is that if you go to your settings, Pete, you ran on a 100-man contest size. So that's a tiny little contest. You can't get 0.1% in a 100-man contest. So that'll always be 0. And also, too, Pete, the important thing here is the ownership is for a huge Millie Maker contest. So if you are going to play 100-man and run those, make sure you change your ownership to something resembling what that would actually look like, or you're probably going to get some really high EVs that aren't really realistic. You'll get some lineups that are weird. You also you made stacks here in the optimizer, which is fine. I like doing nothing here, no stacks, no salary, and then filtering through because you can make it's a lot faster. And you're making, thousands and thousands of lineups, and then you could filter them afterwards, especially if I'm streaming because it's faster to sim. But it's fast enough anyway. So,
yeah. And we mentioned this. I'll rerun here. We mentioned this last week when we first pulled this up, but you can now go in here and adjust these ownerships however you'd like. So like Brian was saying, we know in the small field that ownerships condense more so around the top plays. There's always like a premium on that. And all of the stuff here with market shares, if you want to go in and IKB a spot because you think, Blake Corum is for some reason going to get more work this week, then Kyron Williams, you can go in here, adjust it and rerun it. And last week too, make sure you guys check out that show. We're not going to spend as much time doing, blow by blow tutorial stuff, but we were talking about how to use the normalize here as well, which essentially provides the guardrails for you IKBing and make sure that those market shares are then evenly distributed throughout the rest of the team and the relevant players based on the tweaks you made there.
And ownership too. So like if you're in a small field and there's like an obvious play that's going to be super high owned, you could just move him up a lot and then click normalize, and it'll normally distribute the rest of the ownership to the other players.
Yep. And sorry, I'll rerun this again here with those stacks disabled. But Youda, how much? What kind of stuff were you messing with or tweaking with the Sims last week, and how have you been using them yourself?
I've mostly been trying to run it through the shady diversifier. But I'm probably switching over to our tool this coming week because we just added, I believe, the player exposures page. So I was still using Optimizer here in week 1, just getting into the season, familiarizing myself with like the whole NFL lineup building. So I haven't actually built through our own sim to this point, but I'm going to start this week.
So Brian, I did make that tweak. I set it for a 3K size field. So we now have that top 0.1%. I'm going to be playing in the SPY this week. This is a contest, 4,444 entrants. So this is a pretty good proxy for that, but maybe walk through people again, kind of what they should be thinking about these numbers, EV top 1%, ITM in the money, etc.
Yeah, so your EV will probably be a little bigger in the 3 you made for 3K. You probably still should adjust ownership, Pete. You could definitely do it, just to fit the SPY a little bit more accurately on Sunday when you rerun this. And you just mentioned there's a player exposures tab there, right there to the left of graded lineups. Optimal results, you'll also see this. And it'll show what the optimal rate of the player was, if you filter lineups, if you start doing stacks, Pete, like run backs or whatever, it'll show exactly what your exposure is. Or if you only want to enter 20 lineups, you just click 20, it'll show you what the exposure of 20 lineups is. And it'll have the base top 150 by EV. And then if you run the shady portfolio too, it'll also have that exposure laid out for you. So that was added this week. It was kind of annoying week 1. We didn't have that, but it's on there now.
And it makes sense that you're going to see, obviously, you see the optimal leverage, which is the optimal rate subtracted by the projected ownership. And you're going to see a mix up here, right? Because the best lineups are going to include some very popular plays. And then they're also going to contain some plays that are more unique. So if you're glancing at this page, Youda, after running some stuff, what are if you're eyeballing these exposures, are you then kind of going back in and being like, you know what, I don't want that much Jahmyr Gibbs, and then tweaking, or how would you kind of use this?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think it's useful for aligning your lineups to reflect not just what the sim wants, but also get your own takes in. And so if I'm seeing I'm relatively much higher compared to the field on certain guys, and I don't really like that guy's outlook, go back in, adjust that projection or ownership, whatever I think fits better, and just get it closer to what you actually want in the end. And that's kind of what the whole idea of like bullying sims is.
Yeah. And that you mentioned there's 2 things that you could do as far as like, say we thought this Gibbs stuff was a little high and we didn't want to be quite there. You could obviously adjust his projection, his market share. But if I boosted his ownership, like say he was going to be, 35% owned, I assume then the sim's probably going to like him less too. That's like another way to bring down what your overall exposure would be.
Yeah, but just in a different way. Because if it was like a smaller field, it might not do that much to your exposures. But if it was in a large field, something like that, in theory, cranking up the ownership a lot would be more impactful for that. And while like the projection aspect is going to kind of like have this like more linear effect where it goes down everywhere.
And then as far as like, say we wanted to say, it was a popular narrative heading into this year. Hey, Jahmyr Gibbs is going to emerge more as the clear lead back for the Lions. David Montgomery is going to take more of a back seat. If you wanted to come in here and kind of adjust that with TD market share, say I boost his up to, 65%. If I then hit normalize, it's going to bring David Montgomery's down. And it did adjust his to make it work. But that's one way, right, to get that kind of IKB on the touchdown split.
Yeah.
And if you wanted it higher, like I wanted it, say maybe 60%, you could just go even bigger, take Jahmyr Gibbs up to 75%, and then it brings it down to 63% when I normalize.
Yeah, you got it. Basically, because it's normalizing all the players, it's going to have to fit to 100%, right? There's no more. There's no more available than 100%. So if you actually wanted it 65, you probably should put it like 75 and then normalize. I'm sure people will get used to that. And the only other two ways, if you wanted to change that individual player, is his share of the carries or receptions, or just lower the game script, the game plays or the game total or both. That would affect all the players, obviously. But
yeah. So I'll rerun this here. And then this is my favorite way to use the Run the Sims 2 is to even see, like, I'm really bullish on a player or whatever. And if you boost them and you don't see their optimal rate increasing that much, it means there's probably some bigger issues, at least with the slate dynamics or whatever, where it might just not be as good of a play as you think, even if you give them more work. The Sim's still not liking it. So I like being able to test those assumptions individually. You can see here, though, in this one, just boosting Jahmyr Gibbs' market share of TDs vaulted him into the top exposure play, where it's saying, yeah, if he's getting a third or three quarters of those touchdown opportunities, he is going to be one of the top optimal rates. So that's a fun way to mess with it. Youda, let's talk a little bit, though, more like game environment this week. Obviously, week one was super low scoring, not a ton of like had to have it scores. We saw Fields and Dimes kind of emerge as the two quarterbacks you needed. Any specific games stand out to you this week?
Well, it's still like pretty middling totals. I kind of like the Dallas game here, where
go ahead.
Where we have like it's kind of like a alignment of a lot of like these different buy lows, where Dak plays a really good game. The Giants kind of like are pretty reliant on like these man coverage concepts with probably the worst secondary in the league. They're back at home. They might want to like get their offense jump started in like a more of a low resistance matchup where they can sort of dictate whatever they want to do. So Giants don't really have any corners, play a lot of man coverage. Historically, always bad against like wide receiver ones, and Dallas has two of them. So it's like a combination of like bounce back aspect as well as mean reversion, where they kind of had like a low end performance, but you could kind of see the makings of a above average offense overall. Definitely a good passing game.
Yeah, and they're like the perfect buy low spot in that Javonte Vultures, the 2 goal line touchdowns. CeeDee Lamb misses on some massive plays. Pickens doesn't hit on anything big. And it's so easy to see how that just flips and it happens through the passing game. Any worry about that Giants defensive line? I know that they've it's a pretty solid one as far as getting to the quarterback, or do you think Dak can offset that?
No, definitely. It's one of the best. There is some upside to like the Dallas O-line, since historically they've been a good unit. It's not really the same guys. But I sort of just like the variance in general of like man coverage concepts, which Giants have always been running. And when you have two of the top 12 receivers or whatever, you only need like 2 plays to really get there.
How do you think, is Dak a quarterback in your lineup builds that you would be interested in double stacking, or mainly like skinny stacking and playing an alpha game with one of the wide receivers?
in this version and in this matchup where he might be able to do whatever he wants, I'd prefer a double.
Yeah. Do you have, I mean, you won, it was, what was it? Was it 2 years ago when you won that Millie with the CJ Stroud? It was that triple stack, right? You had like Noah Brown and all of that. And it kind of like, I know blew a lot of people's minds, myself included, because we're like, oh, you can do those onslaughts in smaller field contests, right? Where you don't need to be perfect at every spot. And you're rolling this out in the Millie. How do you think about those like mega correlations and specifically the contest size you're deploying it in?
I think that instance was actually coincidental, and it was actually a hand build where my normal settings wouldn't even allow that particular triple stack. Wow. So I think I just partially it was related to that week's pricing being really, really tight. And so over correlating might give you a little more value because you're sort of foregoing fewer points by just correlating more, like not having to play raw projection just because top end raw projection isn't very good. So I normally wouldn't even allow that in a large field. And if you were to look back at lineups that week, it might have been like one of like maybe 1 or 2 total triple stacks.
Yeah, that's crazy. So even in your whole thing to just sneak in a few hand builds there, how do you, if you are doing that, I feel like the risk, at least when I used to hand build lineups, is that I was basically just sacrificing too much projection, you know, because
I wouldn't call it really a hand build. It was like the optimizer was still giving me something. I was just adjusting what it had to sort of, it was probably the idea of like tweaking like portfolios of like my Stroud portfolio. I would look through the 150 and like if there was like 12 Strouds, I would kind of want to balance those out. So I might not even have that process now anymore. So if you had me to run back that slate today, I don't probably get to that lineup.
So we're talking about the Cowboys. So I did do kind of what Brian suggested after rerunning those lineups, and I lowered the Gibbs thing back to normal there, so that wasn't getting out of hand. I filtered for Dak, and I also filtered for at least a skinny stack with Dak. And so now it is kind of interesting to look through and see, you see this top lineup is just a single stack with CD, but then the second lineup here, we do get Jake Ferguson in here. There's the third lineup has George Pickens, and then the fourth lineup has a CD in George Pickens. So getting a pretty good variety of Dak stacks showing up here with pretty good EV.
In the full sim I ran before the show, he was like the 5th highest.
We might want to look into that Dak with CD in the defense that uses 48.8K being plus EV.
Interesting. Yeah. Although couldn't that track if you said like it's one of those spots where they just like bulldoze the Giants at home, 40-10. You get the defensive pick six, or that just doesn't pass the sniff test for you?
Well, if the pick six happens early, it's way less likely that Dak and CD generate throughout the rest of the game.
You could also, Pete, sort by minimum salary too if you don't want lineups under.
Yeah, I guess it's also the salary part of it.
Yeah, that's what it sounded like to me.
But isn't the sim? I mean, the sim's looking at the lineups that are using more of the salary too, right? And it's just saying that these are still grading out the best.
Yeah, I'm more commenting that it's interesting. The sim likes that.
Yeah. Well, that's been my whole experience with looking at sim lineups the past couple of years, is it puts me on builds that I would never think of on my own. Like here's another one down here that's Dak, Javonte, Pickens, which we see some of those running back quarterback pairings, although the way Javonte gets there is just goal line touchdowns. Like I don't think Javonte's breaking off a 50-yard run. So that's another one where I'm like, if I was hand building that, I'm probably never getting there.
Yeah. Agreed.
It's not necessarily like that was a little eye-opening, which I think people probably already knew, but maybe Sims helped confirm, was that the running back, even if they're touchdown dependent, isn't negatively correlated to the pass catchers or to QB, just because, especially on DK with reception, PPR receptions, just like being able to have a goal line dive meant that a lot of times you drove 70 yards down the field, which could come through the pass catchers.
Yeah. And it's the
think once you get to like deeper into stacks, like if we're talking like 4 players from a team, like more of an onslaught, there could be that like cannibalizing factor where, they are correlated, but it's a lot of that correlation is reflected in correlation to the downside, as well as like moderate positive correlation, like when they're scoring like 30. But like once they're scoring 40 and 50, it's not that they're correlated, it's just that your team scored 50. So like the pie is just huge. The pie of points is just huge that they all get there.
Brian, what are some of the other settings you would be messing with here as you were trying to find lineups that you like?
I don't really love leaving salary on a Sunday with a full slate, a ton of salary, just generally speaking. So I might do that one as well. And I know this isn't this page, Pete, but while you were changing Jahmyr Gibbs, just a little note, there is a reset all button up there next to the save button. If you scroll up just above this filter, you see how there's next to upload projections, there's reset all and save. Slightly above where you're at, right up. Just above.
Sorry. I got you. Yeah.
Yeah. So
reset
there's
all here.
Yeah. So like if you do a whole bunch of changes on Jahmyr Gibbs or something, you're like, because you could individually reset him or everything you've done, and you could also save those changes and come back later if you like doing something in the morning and then have to go do something and come back, just so people know. But that I would probably do that, and then maybe some run backs or something like that. And take a look.
Yeah, so I guess that's another thing too. And run backs is always a tricky one where I'm like, do I set it as a rule, or do I just look at it globally like we just did? And then, hey, if the run backs are naturally popping up in the top lineups, great. Or, is it bad to force it before the sim has had a chance to rule on whether that's good or not?
Before you answer there, I was going to another important one here, Pete, is if you scroll down the defense, allowing the defense with players, I'm sure I think it's below even where you're showing here. You don't like, a lot of people don't even want to allow that. So that is technically allowed, especially for smaller slates. You might want it. So that's one that people should want. And then in the middle, Pete, there was players from the same game with the minimum. That could be one, because then that'll be like you could be a run back and one in the same team. It could be, so that might be an option where you're not bullying it so much, but you're getting closer to what you want. I think Youda was going to answer, though. I wanted to give that in before. So feel free.
Yeah. So definitely mess around with this. Like we talked about last week, you guys can get 10% off all of the subscriptions over there at Run the Sims, including this Sim Runner here. We haven't messed with the Shady Portfolio tool. We can take a look at that again here today. But that 10% off with the promo code Pete, and you guys can get in here and start messing around with everything as well. I'm trying to think what I put on the filters here, where it filtered to a single lineup here.
Players per game. The
players per game.
That one right there. You have 2.
Oh, excluding quarterback. Okay. Yeah.
Ooh,
wow. There we go. That's it's like when Smiz used to have the Jerry bar. Adam had the Jerry bark on the old DFS Edge podcast there. Okay, so yeah, now we get some more lineups back in here. I was going to ask Brian, when you're looking at the expected ROI for some of these, like how do you think about that number? Obviously, big number good, bad number bad, but is there any other nuance people should think about with it?
I kind of was getting at it earlier. It definitely depends on the size of the tournament you're building. So if you max all that out, you're probably not going to get to the 200s, even with our initial ownership here. But this ownership needs to be dialed in still in the project, and there's still news to come and stuff like that. So I wouldn't expect it to even show 200s come Sunday for sure. But every EV calculation you should take with a grain of salt, no matter whose product you're using. It's just like a directionally hopefully directionally accurate number. Don't expect to make 135% ROI for sure on any given lineup, which is one of the reasons why diversification tools are so useful.
Yep. Youda, I was going to ask, because you mentioned the ownership. Obviously, we're still in flux. That gets really firmed up as the weekend progresses. From a process standpoint, it is helpful to be in here on a Thursday, on a Friday, tweaking so you get the lay of the land. But when do you recommend actually getting in there, making your final adjustments? I assume it's after inactives, but how do you balance, getting familiar with it, but also waiting for the projections and the ownership to be as good as possible?
Well, not too much of that aspect is going to change on Sunday. So I think you can actually make ownership adjustment just once, and you could actually probably do it based on your first run, like running an ownership adjustment on what you received from the sim with the baseline information. Since there's other people simming out there, it probably slowly goes in that direction of whatever the sim run was. So that probably gets under projected, what your exposures might be that the sim says is optimal initially. Another part would be if you view ownership as stacks through the lens of stacks rather than individuals. So last week, Lawrence was a good value, and then the stack came fairly cheap, or because pricing was loose, Lawrence Thomas was super accessible. Both those guys probably ended up higher than normal, or at least higher than what ownership projections would have them. So I guess you can view accessibility of the stack as part of it. Whereas Daniels, right? Daniels was a lot of part of these chalky optimal cash builds when he's not stacked. But if you were to stack him, McLaurin or Debo, especially McLaurin, pricing for that gets high enough to the point that no sort of tool that values projection no tool that values projection highly is really going to get to those. So I'm sure some spots would have projected Daniels for 12% or something, and he probably comes in at 6-7 just because it's not accessible.
So I did just mess around with including the shady portfolio diversity.
Do you still have the filter on, Pete?
I do, I believe. Let me turn that. Should I turn that off there?
Yeah, it would be under the last tab, the SimRunner Pro tab. The last.
Oops.
Oh, well, now you can turn it off after this time. It doesn't matter.
And explain, I know some people might have missed last week's show. Explain to them what this shady diversity tool does here for their lineups.
Basically it decannibalizes your lineups. So you're not eating your own EV. Or I think Youda explains it as it gives you the highest EV from a portfolio standpoint from all the lineups.
Right. Because what's happening there, when I was looking at some of those lineups, even with the stacks, right, it was every lineup had Harold Fannin, because he's projecting pretty well. But if you were rolling out a lot of these lineups here,
so if you go to advanced filters, Pete, and get rid of your that rule, you got a couple of them there. You got that one, you got that rule in the middle there, players per game.
Yep.
Just get rid of that. So then this will show you all the ranked now. Lineup. If you go, you could leave that. Go back to that end tab and then click advanced filter. Yeah, there you go. So now you see how he ranks. If you were to do, I think you did 20. So if you're going to enter a 20 max, you move that slider to 20, and you can look at the EVs. So the 12th lineup, you could see there, the EV is much lower than the ones around it. And you can tell it looks like it's the only Stafford stack you have there.
Yep.
In that grouping. It looks pretty diverse. This is where you could go to the exposures and then sort by position. QB is a good one to sort by. And then you could see what shady has compared to the optimal rates and stuff like that and ownership pretty easily here.
That's cool. And like you said, when you're looking at the lineups, you can see here, like one lineup doesn't get used down here that has 193% EV, which would otherwise be what, like the fourth or fifth highest EV of all the lineups. But because it doesn't make sense, or it's probably cannibalizing, in this case, it's a Trevor Lawrence here. Looks like we have another Trevor Lawrence. Whatever's going on there on the back end is saying that it's not worth as much in concert with your other lineups.
Yeah. I mean, I give this example a bunch of times, Pete, but I think it makes sense to me. Is like the MVP bet. If someone's going to bet a player to win MVP and then bet another player to win MVP, well, only one guy can win MVP. Maybe you should just stick with your best bet and not cannibalize the EV of your second one, even though it might still be a decent bet. And that's partially what it's doing there. And I really like when you kind of ask the question about like, what does the EV mean? No one knows what the field is going to exactly look like. We're all guessing, right? And so it's like, given these assumptions that you tell it based on the market share or the ownership, here is generally some lineup constructions, and you're going through thousands and thousands of lineups. So there's going to be a bunch of good ones in there. Here's kind of generally what it is. So it's nice getting this second layer of portfolio diversification where it's not just because it's the optimizer has the same issue where it's kind of like, this is gospel. This is 100%. This is what's going to happen. Yeah. Here's the optimal lineup. But of course, we all know there's a lot of randomness in sports. And so really it's not, Sims are taking into account a lot more than an optimizer because it's doing all these random rolls and bringing in the distributions and comparing them all. So that's super useful, but it's still pretty random. So having a portfolio tool is really useful when you're thinking about randomness.
Yep. Youda, any other, I know we're kind of in the weeds on settings and bowling the Sims here, but I'm sure the people would love some more of your week 2 takes. Are there any players, any other specific spots that you might be higher on than the field?
I haven't done like a full review, but I was more looking at like situations that were a bit fluky from week 1 that don't really align, and like whether those are real or if those are just one-offs. I guess like Detroit at home after getting blown out, you would think it's kind of like the running game version of the Dallas idea, where you would think that like they want to get into their like base rhythm, like their home base, and that's running the football. And after seeing what Green Bay did yesterday, Green Bay might just be that good defensively. So I would sort of anticipate more of like a run-heavy game plan from Detroit. Not that that's that useful for DFS, where we just want upside and like raw carries isn't really going to get you there. But maybe that would be like a ding on like Bears offense or something like that.
Yeah, that was I was listening to my buddy Pat Corain was doing his walkthrough and was talking about Amon-Ra had one of the highest double team rates of any wide receiver in week 1. The Packers were just selling out to stop him, which was forcing Jared Goff off of his first reads. And so they were just in a funk. And then we saw the Packers do the same thing to the Commanders last night. I mean, made Jaden Daniels look very human in that. So yeah, I'm very in on getting back on the Lions at home here. I'm guessing there's like some fear of like, oh no, Ben Johnson is gone. They flopped week 1. Maybe this isn't a team that's going to put up what they did last year. So yeah, I like that shout here. And I should mention, guys, let's take advantage too of the live aspect. If you guys have any questions you want, I will selfishly ask these guys things that pop up in my head. But if you guys have some stuff there, feel free to let me know. And I will pass it along here to these guys. We talked about the Dolphins. We talked about the Lions here. What are your thoughts, Youda, on the 2 rushing quarterbacks who smashed last week, Fields and Daniel Jones? Is that a mirage, or do you think that's more to come?
Given that they all both come with new situations, I think that's with with the Fields one, I think that game just became a shootout. So it was like a little helped by like the whole back and forth, where it's kind of like whoever had the ball scoring seemed inevitable. So like obviously that's going to be one of like his top like 5 games of the year or whatever. But you know, given that they're new situations, I think that favors both of them.
Yeah. Here's a question from Chad. I talked about this a little bit with JM, but yeah, Mac Jones, obviously 4K, no Brock Purdy. DraftKings didn't have time to adjust the salaries since we got that news. Chad wants to know, is this a jam or a better fade for small field in particular? Do either of you guys have a
for Mac Jones, like Niner stacks?
Yep.
They're not on the main. Oh, they are on the main slate. We in the run I did, he was not popping up at all. So
yeah, I see 2.2% here. Did you have some thoughts on that, Youda?
I think my guess is that pricing is loose again, so you don't really need to go to like a quarterback who's that cheap if he's not coming with pass catchers that are expensive, right? Like, because even McCaffrey's cheap, so I don't really see. I think it's like playable, like it's like the cop-out answer, but it's just playable in certain combinations.
Yeah, because you really, I mean, isn't it kind of like the classic cash game conversation where he's likely to pay that off from a points per dollar value perspective, but like the true ceiling for him being the tournament quarterback you need is probably pretty low.
Yeah, I mean, McCaffrey's going to be high. They're a little bit correlated, so if you were to get there, he's still kind of getting there with chalk. It's a little bit like Flacco last week, where you had the 2 chalk pass catchers, and that's sort of the only reason you're even getting the Flacco. So it's not really a good play from that aspect, but maybe if you were to play him in a way that's kind of unique, like maybe fade McCaffrey or something, like double stack, like CMC gets hurt or something, just like he's still going to be fairly low based on what the ownership is. Yeah. So if you play him in a way that's like still rather correlated, but a little off consensus script, and if you did like Pearsall, Olave or something like that, you'd probably be able to get away with chalkier pieces around it.
Yeah. And then you just run into the issue of like, man, if CMC did get hurt or wasn't involved, it's like, does this offense have enough firepower to put up a score that you'd actually even want in a tournament? Go ahead.
I have a couple questions on based on our sims. I'd be interested to see what both you guys think. Bo Nix, Denver. We have him at 2% owned. Do you think that's right? And he's popping pretty hard. What do you guys got on that?
Let me see.
Why Youda looks that up, I would just say from an ownership, that sounds right. I don't think anyone wants to play.
Because Sutton is 6.3. And it's Denver defense being involved. Like a lot of it is like just Denver defense being involved, kind of slowing the game down. I think it's right. He also played a terrible game week 1. So I think that might be factoring as well.
Keeping his ownership down. The other 2, one was Daniel Jones. You kind of mentioned him, but at 2% owned, that seems low to me, but maybe I'm wrong. And Aaron Rodgers, is he back? Currently like 1% ownership projection.
So this is what I was getting at with like the game getting a little bit out of hand, where like both coaches were just abandoning their own game plans because they didn't feel as though they had a shot defensively. So on offense, they were both just like airing it out much higher than they should, or like not only much higher than they should, it's like much higher than they expected. Like even the coaching probably did not ever see that game going that way, and that's sort of also why these guys, like Fields was coming in at like 1% owned and winning GPPs. But I don't think Rodgers played well. I think he just had massive volume.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at go ahead.
It could be DK Metcalf too, maybe driving this, because we're getting a ton of DK Metcalf. right now.
Yeah, actually, looking at it, Rodgers did not play well. He took 4 sacks, 30 attempts, 240 yards. It's just that they didn't have any rushing touchdowns. So he did like the old like Aaron Rodgers like touchdown vulturing thing where like he throws for like these short touchdowns. It's like how Adams had like 15 touchdowns one year.
Yeah. I think that's a good note too of trying to, obviously there's going to be stuff that the Sims are doing that we can't comprehend, which is the whole reason we use Sims. But then also you can sometimes deduce, why is Aaron Rodgers showing up? It's like, well, DK Metcalf is grading out extremely well. But yeah, I think that Daniel Jones is an interesting one just because he looks so good. And I think the tendency is going to be to just kind of gnaw wave it, especially because of this matchup. And people just don't want to deal with teams against the Broncos. So I actually could see him being fairly low here.
Yeah. You can see the 2%, huh?
Yeah.
I was thinking he's going to come in higher because I think Levitan churched him up a little bit on his pod.
He's never been truly bad. The surroundings have always been rather bad. So
yeah,
you can't really rule him out as being a decent quarterback. And also the way he scores is going to be good because of like the ability to like run for 50 yard run, as well as like having a pretty high goal line touchdown rate for rushing. Also, the weapons aren't dust. Like the Warren, the rookie tight end, could be like top 5 immediately. Pittman's had a good record. Downs is pretty underrated. So like there's pieces for him to work with.
The other thing too, looking at, and I also looked at ETR's quarterback ownership projections, even in like large field and small field, they don't have a single quarterback over 10% ownership, which is like pretty rare. I feel like most weeks there's at least, Flacco is like 14, 15%. So It looks like it's going to be extremely spread out at quarterback this week.
I should say too, you can upload projections and ownership to this too. So if you want to use someone else's, download the template and so you could upload. No one has this, but you could upload market share or like catches, attempts. Either one will work.
Yeah, I agree with the no QB concentrated for this week. Part of it is it's 12 games, so it's the most we'll ever have. The other part of it is probably like not that many like wide receiver injuries, so there's no like clear value opening on that aspect. And then I guess a good amount of like the higher end salaries filtering towards running back.
Does the fact that Madden just dropped the Justin Fields is the best card in Madden Ultimate Team, does that do anything for you guys?
I think it might just do something for you, Brian. I think that's the only person it might do something.
Does that change your mind at all, Pete?
No,
okay.
It doesn't.
Right.
If you would have told me yesterday on Lulz that you were telling me about the top Madden player in Chicago, and I asked you if he was your hero, and you said no. So if he's not your hero, then this does nothing for me.
No.
All right, guys. I am going to power this down because I'm hopping over to do the Underdog show with Nez. We're going to preview the slate from an underdog perspective, but very much enjoyed this walkthrough with Bric and Youda. Like I said, if you guys want to get in there, mess with the sim runner, mess with the diversity tool, adjust market shares, all of the bells and whistles here, you can get 10% off with promo code Pete. Go check that out. Brian, any other kind of run the Sims things people should know about this week?
Yeah, Underdog, we have the Run the Sims projections for Underdog now, live from Draft Caddy. If you're a Draft Caddy user or Run the Sims user, it's on there.
Beautiful. Yeah, so that's part of the in game. You can get the Draft Caddy here as well. Really nice overlay tool there if you're drafting a bunch of battle royale teams like I will be this week. Youda, any final parting shots? I know, around the industry, they like to do the flag plants. You want a bold call? Anything you want to go out on here?
No, I don't want to like put a play attached to it.
Okay.
I touched on a few anyway.
Yeah. The Cowboys, you got to read between the lines here. And it sounds like Youda likes the Cowboys this week. But thank you again to Bric, to Youda, to JM, everybody hanging out in the chat. Like I said, every single Friday live at 1 p.m. Eastern, block party followed by Bully the Sims. If there's specific stuff you'd like us to focus on, let us know in the comments. This can we're still figuring out the exact format for this Bully the Sim show. So if there's some stuff you guys would like us to focus on more, I am certainly open to suggestions. Otherwise, you should be redirected right now to Off and On the Clock. I'm going to go do that show with Nez. We will see you guys next time here on Block Party and Bully the Sims. Peace.